the unfolding saga of Julius Caesar, a journey through ancient Rome. Welcome, esteemed listeners, to a profound journey back in time, to the very heart of ancient Rome. Tonight, we shall trace the legendary footsteps of Gaius Julius Caesar, beneath the venerable marble arches and bathed in the golden glow of a republic poised on the precipice of monumental transformation. This is not merely a tale, but the epic chronicle of a man who ascended from the labyrinthine streets of the eternal city to the zenith of power. His name destined to resonate through the annals of history forevermore. Before we embark upon this captivating narrative, I extend my heartfelt gratitude for your presence here. Should these historical echoes bring you solace and tranquility, a simple gesture of liking or subscribing would mean the world to me. Your support fuels these tranquil explorations through the depths of history, allowing me to share more such journeys with you. And now, with the stage set, let us begin this extraordinary adventure. The dawn of a legend, early life in Subura. In the tender embrace of an ancient Roman morning. As the cobblestones still retained the cool kiss of the night, and the city's first vendors meticulously arranged their wares in the bustling market squares, a boy was born who would, in due course, irrevocably alter the course of the world. The year was approximately 100 BC. In the labyrinthine Subura district, where narrow alleys meandered between humble abodes and the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread wafted from open doorways, Gaius Julius Caesar drew his inaugural breath. The Subura, it must be noted, was not the illustrious Palatine Hill, where senators constructed their opulent marble villas. Nor was it the vibrant Forum, where charismatic orators captivated spellbound crowds. Rather, it was a district teeming with the lives of ordinary Romans, shopkeepers, skilled craftsmen, and families who toiled with their hands, finding deep, untroubled slumber after days of arduous labor. Yet, even amidst these unassuming streets, the esteemed Caesar family carried within their very essence the ancient and hallowed narratives of Rome itself. As dawn painted the renowned 7 hills in breathtaking hues of rose and gold, young Gaius would awaken to the gentle symphony of the city stirring to life. The distant, rhythmic calls of merchants proclaiming their goods, the soft, rhythmic clip-clop of donkeys steadily carrying water from the Tiber's embrace, and the hushed, reverent whispers of prayers emanating from household shrines, where humble offerings of bread and wine honored the vigilant gods who safeguarded Roman homes. These were the indelible sounds that etched themselves into his earliest memories. The very rhythm of a city that throbbed with the unwavering heartbeat of an ancient, profound civilization. His mother, Aurelia, a woman of grace and wisdom, would weave captivating tales for him as she gently combed his dark hair in the soft morning light. Stories of their venerable ancestor Aeneas, who, fleeing the fiery demise of Troy, navigated the wine-dark seas to lay the very foundation of the Roman lineage. Tales of Romulus and Remus, miraculously suckled by a she-wolf on the banks of the Tiber. These were far more than mere diversions. They were the very threads meticulously woven together to form the intricate tapestry of Roman identity. They were the sacred narratives that intimately connected every citizen to a destiny far grander than their individual selves. And so, the story flows onward. As young Caesar matured under the vigilant gaze of the household gods, his mind already alight with inquisitive questions that would, in time, undeniably reshape the entire world. The Caesar family, though not possessed of vast wealth, held something immeasurably more precious within Roman society, an impeccable pedigree. Their lineage, steeped in the mists of legend, was traced directly back to Venus herself, the goddess of love and exquisite beauty. This divine connection was not a mere boast, it was a profound wellspring of gravitas, that inherent weight of ancestral dignity that Romans esteemed above all gold. When Caesar's father would lead him to the Forum on festive days, meticulously pointing out the statues of great men and the sacred temples where their revered ancestors had once served, the young boy would feel the irresistible pull of destiny, much like a gentle, unwavering current in a serene stream. A glimpse into Roman grandeur, the Forum and early education. The Forum Romanum in those bygone days was a spectacle of profound wonder. unfolding like a magnificent marble dream beneath the warm Mediterranean sun. Majestic columns soared skyward, their surfaces intricately carved with heroic narratives of triumph and sacrifice. The venerable temple of Vesta, where sacred flames perpetually flickered, cast ethereal, dancing shadows across the impeccably polished stones. Citizens, cloaked in dignified togas, moved with unhurried grace between the basilicas where justice was meticulously dispensed, and the bustling markets where exotic goods from across the known world exchanged hands with the soft, melodious clinks of silver coins. Here, young Caesar would intently listen to the skilled orators honing their craft, their voices rising and falling like enchanting music as they expounded upon the intricacies of law and honor, of unwavering duty to the state and the revered gods. The Latin words flowed from their lips like rich honey, each syllable meticulously chosen, each pause as deliberate and impactful as the morning mist. He would observe with keen fascination how a truly skilled speaker could command hundreds of people into perfect, rapt silence. How the perfectly chosen word at the precise moment could stir hearts and fundamentally alter minds. These invaluable lessons, absorbed during his formative years like sunlight permeating solid stone, would undoubtedly serve him with great distinction in the years that lay ahead. In due course, his path led him toward formal education, where Caesar swiftly distinguished himself as a student of exceptional promise. Roman boys of noble birth were expected to master not only Latin but Greek as well. For it was the conquered Greeks who had, ironically, become the esteemed teachers of their Roman conquerors in matters of profound philosophy, eloquent rhetoric, and the refined arts. Caesar's tutor, a patient and insightful Greek freedman named Marcus Antonius Gnipho, would arrive each morning as the household stirred to life, reverently carrying scrolls of Homer and Cicero as if they were priceless treasures. Under the gentle, discerning guidance of his teacher, Caesar learned to decipher the lyrical lines of the Iliad, where legendary heroes strode across sun-drenched plains and the gods themselves actively participated in mortal conflicts. He delved into the intricate arguments of Plato, where one profound question inexorably led to another in an endless, captivating spiral of wonder. Most significantly, he diligently practiced the demanding art of rhetoric, mastering the intricate skill of weaving words into compelling patterns that could persuade, profoundly inspire, and effortlessly command. His voice, even in his youth, possessed an inherent quality that compelled others to pause and listen, a natural, undeniable authority that seemed to emanate from some deeper, innate source. The afternoons often found him on the Campus Martius, the vast open field situated just outside the city walls, where Roman youth diligently honed the arts of warfare. Here, beneath the expansive Italian sky, Caesar would practice with wooden swords alongside boys who would, in the fullness of time, fight valiantly by his side in far-flung lands. Their instructors were hardened, grizzled veterans who had served with distinction in the legions, men who spoke of discipline and courage not as abstract virtues, but as the grim, practical necessities for survival itself. Caesar quickly proved himself a natural prodigy with weapons, his movements flowing with the effortless grace of water, even as he painstakingly mastered the precise and deadly techniques of Roman swordplay. But beyond his remarkable physical prowess, it was his innate ability to inspire others that truly set him apart from his peers. When the boys were divided into mock armies for training skirmishes, Caesar would invariably find himself chosen as their leader, not through coercion or bluster, but through a quiet, unwavering confidence that instilled a fervent desire in others to follow him implicitly. And so, the story flows onward. As the boy blossomed into a young man beneath the boundless blue of Roman skies, his character steadily taking shape like malleable clay in the skilled hands of a master sculptor. Stepping into manhood, toga virilis, betrothal, and shifting political winds. As Caesar reached his 16th year, the momentous time arrived for him to assume the toga virilis, the toga of manhood, in a ceremony as ancient and revered as Rome itself. On the designated day, as the gentle morning sun cast long, embracing shadows across the city, he walked with his family toward the Forum, leaving behind the bordered toga of his childhood for the pure white garment that unequivocally marked him as a citizen endowed with full rights and profound responsibilities. The ceremony, while outwardly simple, was deeply profound. Before the watchful household gods, Caesar formally declared his unequivocal readiness to serve the state. His father, with gravitas, placed the new toga around his shoulders, while Aurelia, his mother, whispered heartfelt prayers to the goddesses who presided over young men standing at the momentous threshold of adulthood. The weight of the fabric felt distinctly different from his childhood attire, heavier somehow, as if it bore within its very folds the accumulated expectations and aspirations of his countless ancestors. That very same year brought about changes that would ripple through Caesar's life like stones gently dropped into still, reflective water. His father meticulously arranged his betrothal to Cossutia, the daughter of an affluent equestrian family. It was a pragmatic match, meticulously designed to bolster the standing of both families within the intricate web of Roman society. Young men of Caesar's social standing understood implicitly that marriage was, first and foremost, a matter of political expediency and property, rather than personal affection, though many couples did, over time, cultivate genuine love for one another. Yet, as Caesar entered his 17th year, the political currents of Rome began to shift dramatically, in ways that would irrevocably alter his destiny. The venerable General Gaius Marius, who had meticulously reformed the Roman legions and achieved victories that dramatically expanded the empire's borders, had recently passed away. His political heir was a formidable man named Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who governed Rome with an iron fist, albeit one cloaked in the velvet glove of legal procedure. Sulla, perhaps discerning something extraordinary in the young Caesar, or perhaps simply seeking to solidify another noble family's allegiance to his cause, arranged for Caesar to marry his own daughter, Cornelia. This was not merely a personal union but a potent political declaration, for Sulla represented the populares, the powerful faction that vociferously claimed to champion the common people, standing in stark opposition to the Optimates, the aristocratic party fiercely defending traditional privileges. The wedding unfolded on a soft, gentle spring morning, when the very air was imbued with the sweet promise of new growth. Cornelia, a mere 14 years of age, moved through the solemn ceremony with the profound dignity expected of a Roman bride, her face gracefully veiled in the traditional flame-colored flammeum. Caesar, now 18, delivered his vows with a solemnity that genuinely impressed even the most cynical observers present. As their hands joined before the sacred household altar, neither could have possibly foreseen the monumental trials that lay inevitably ahead. Navigating treacherous waters, Sulla's proscriptions and exile. In due course, his path led him onward, directly into the perilous currents of Roman politics, a treacherous arena where a single misstep could lead to devastating consequences, from ignominious exile to outright death. The marriage to Cornelia brought Caesar more than just a wife. It inadvertently brought him to the formidable attention of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Marius's most bitter adversary and the undisputed leader of the Optimates. Sulla had been absent from Rome, engaged in arduous wars in the East. However, his impending return was anticipated with a potent mixture of hope and dread, an emotional cocktail that Romans typically reserved for the triumphant return of conquering generals. When the news finally broke that Sulla had landed in Italy with his legions, the political atmosphere in Rome began to escalate, rising like the oppressive heat emanating from sun-baked stones. Caesar found himself inextricably caught between the relentless, grinding millstones of Roman civil war. His well-known connections to Cinna's faction unequivocally marked him as a potential enemy of Sulla. Yet, his noble birth and undeniably evident talents rendered him too valuable to be simply eliminated without careful consideration. As Sulla's formidable forces inexorably approached Rome, many of Cinna's ardent supporters either fled the city in haste or quickly made expedient accommodations with the encroaching victor. Caesar, however, chose a markedly different path. On a crisp morning when the autumn mist clung to the Tiber like ethereal gossamer veils, Caesar received a summons that would test the very fiber of his character as profoundly as any battle. Sulla, now the undisputed master of Rome, imperiously commanded him to divorce Cornelia and enter into a more politically palatable marriage. The stark ultimatum was delivered by one of Sulla's lieutenants, a man with a hard, unyielding face who spoke with the casual, unquestioning authority of someone utterly accustomed to absolute obedience, standing resolutely in the atrium of his modest home. With Cornelia steadfastly beside him and the venerable household gods silently gazing down from their shrine, Caesar delivered his answer with quiet, unwavering dignity. He unequivocally declared that he would not divorce his wife. The dire consequences of this audacious refusal were made brutally clear: the forfeiture of his inheritance, immediate exclusion from all public office, and quite possibly, his very life, should Sulla decide to make a chilling example of him. That night, as Rome lay restless under the uneasy sway of its new master, Caesar made a monumental decision that vividly revealed the steel beneath his outwardly courteous exterior. Rather than submitting to Sulla's demands or fleeing in panic, he chose temporary exile, deliberately removing himself from Rome until the volatile political climate shifted. It was a daring gamble, one that demanded both immense courage and profound patience, qualities that would serve him exceptionally well in the years to come. And so, the story flows onward. As the young man learned that sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in direct confrontation, but in the profound wisdom of knowing when to bend gracefully before the approaching storm. The roads of learning and a legendary encounter. Caesar's self-imposed exile led him across the wine-dark waters of the Mediterranean to the illustrious island of Rhodes. Here, renowned Greek scholars had established prestigious schools of rhetoric and philosophy, attracting ambitious young Romans eager for knowledge. The journey itself proved to be a profound revelation for Caesar, who had never before ventured beyond the familiar, comforting hills of Latium. As his ship gracefully cut through the gentle swells, with playful dolphins leaping in its wake, he watched Italy slowly recede into the hazy distance, and felt an exhilarating sense of a wider, boundless world unfolding before him. Rhodes, in those vibrant days, was a captivating crossroads where East and West converged in a harmonious blend of cultures. Its bustling harbor teemed with vessels from every corner of the Mediterranean. Majestic Egyptian grain ships with their distinctive curved prows, Phoenician traders laden with precious purple dye and exotic spices, and sleek warships from various Greek cities, proudly displaying their bronze rams like badges of honor. The city itself rose in graceful terraces from the water's edge, its pristine white buildings gleaming like scattered pearls against the profound blue of the sea and sky. Here, Caesar diligently studied under some of the most brilliant teachers of his era, men who were the intellectual inheritors of the wisdom of Aristotle and Dio Chrysostom. His Greek, already proficient, blossomed into the fluent beauty of poetry. His comprehension of philosophy deepened from mere academic exercise to a genuine, profound wisdom concerning the very nature of power, justice, and the complexities of human ambition. Most significantly, his formidable skills as an orator ascended to new heights as he mastered the art of blending the passionate eloquence of Greek rhetoric with the practical, direct clarity of Roman law. The peaceful rhythm of his studies was abruptly shattered one day by an event that would forever be etched into legend. Caesar had secured passage on a modest merchant vessel bound for Miletus, intending to visit the renowned oracle of Apollo at nearby Didyma. As the ship sailed through the scattered islands of the Dodecanese, its captain meticulously hugging the coastline in the ancient manner, they were suddenly enveloped by a fleet of sleek galleys, flying no discernible flag, manned by crews with fierce, menacing countenances. Pirates had terrorized the Mediterranean for generations, their swift ships striking without warning and vanishing like the morning sea mist. They demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver for Caesar's release, a sum that reflected their assessment of his worth as the scion of a noble Roman family. Caesar's reaction to this demand became the very stuff of legend. He reportedly scoffed at the meager figure, insisting with audacious confidence that they escalate the ransom to 50 talents, asserting that they clearly had no true comprehension of the distinguished individual they had captured. During the weeks of his captivity on a small, rocky island, Caesar treated his captors with an astonishing air of superiority, behaving more as though they were his personal servants than his formidable guards. He imperiously demanded silence when he wished to sleep, mockingly critiqued their subpar speaking skills, and even composed poetry which he recited to them, regardless of their desire to listen. When they exhibited insufficient appreciation for his verses, he would cheerfully threaten to have every one of them crucified the moment he regained his freedom. The pirates, accustomed to cowering, terrified captives, were utterly bewildered by this aristocratic young Roman, who seemed to regard his kidnapping as nothing more than an amusing inconvenience. The demanded ransom was eventually paid by his loyal friends and eager supporters. However, Caesar's threat to return was far from an idle boast. As soon as he reached the mainland, he swiftly assembled a small fleet and returned with chilling resolve to the island. The pirates, who had made the fatal error of dispersing their ships to other waters, were easily captured. True to his ominous word, Caesar had them all crucified, though he extended a grim mercy by having their throats cut first, sparing them the prolonged agony that typically accompanied that brutal form of execution. Return to Rome, new beginnings and shifting power. In due course, the path led him onward to even grander adventures, as the young exile began to forge the formidable reputation that would one day irrevocably shake the very foundations of the world. News eventually reached Caesar in Gaul that Sulla had passed away, his iron grip on the city finally loosening in death as it had never in life. The political climate was once again shifting, creating ripe opportunities for those audacious enough to seize them. Caesar's period of exile had served its profound purpose, providing him not only sanctuary from Sulla's wrath, but also the extensive education and invaluable worldly experience that would distinctly set him apart from his more provincial rivals. His return to Rome was deliberately understated. Devoid of grand gestures or triumphant processions, instead, he slipped back into the city like morning mist returning to the familiar hills. The Rome he found was subtly different from the one he had departed. The harsh certainties of Sulla's dictatorship had given way to the more familiar, intricate chaos of republican politics, with competing factions once again maneuvering for advantage through a complex and delicate dance of alliances, betrayals, and fleeting accommodations. Caesar's initial re-entry into public life came through his appointment as a military tribune, a junior officer's position that afforded him practical experience with the esteemed legions. He was assigned to a garrison in Asia Minor, where the perpetual challenges of provincial administration provided invaluable training for a young man undeniably destined for greater things. Here, beneath the ancient walls of cities that had once known Alexander the Great, Caesar diligently acquired the practical arts of command. How to maintain unwavering discipline without crushing the morale of his troops, how to deftly balance the competing interests of Roman settlers and the indigenous populations, and how to transform raw, inexperienced recruits into steadfast soldiers who would follow orders even unto death. The eastern provinces were a profound revelation to Caesar. In Rome, he had known himself primarily as a distinguished member of an ancient and noble family. But here, he began to grasp the true, immense scope of Roman power. From the fog-shrouded lands of Britain in the north to the sun-scorched deserts of Egypt in the south, from the Atlantic shores of Spain to the formidable mountains of Armenia, Rome's majestic eagles cast their commanding shadows over peoples who had never heard the Latin tongue or worshipped the gods of the Seven Hills. Yet, it was not merely the sheer extent of Roman power that impressed him, but also, crucially, its inherent limitations. The empire was held together by force, undoubtedly, but also by the tacit consent of the governed, by the unwavering promise that Roman rule brought peace, prosperity, and justice. When that promise was shattered, as it occasionally was by corrupt governors or brutal generals, rebellion followed with the inevitability of thunder following lightning. Caesar began to truly comprehend that genuine power emanated not from fear alone, but from the profound ability to make others desire to be ruled. His service in the East was distinguished. Though not overtly spectacular, he exhibited unwavering courage in minor skirmishes, profound wisdom in resolving local disputes, and an unusual, genuine interest in the welfare of the common soldiers under his command. Veterans who served alongside him in those days would later recall how he would stroll among the campfires in the evenings, learning the names of his men and attentively listening to their concerns. It was a leadership style that seemed inherently natural to him, as if he genuinely cared about the lives and opinions of men far beneath him in social rank. And so, the story flows onward. As the young officer learned that empires are not merely built through conquest, but through the patient, meticulous work of administration and the delicate, vital art of earning unwavering loyalty. The lawyer and the quaestor, forging a political path. Upon Caesar's return to Rome following his military service, he found a city vibrant with new possibilities. The rigid structures that Sulla had meticulously imposed were now visibly cracking under the immense pressure of competing ambitions, and astute individuals were discovering novel avenues to advance their careers through paths that had been firmly closed for years. Caesar, with characteristic foresight, resolved to pursue the traditional Roman route to political prominence, the law courts. Roman legal proceedings were, in those days, as much a form of public entertainment as they were serious business. Citizens would flock to the forum to hear celebrated advocates passionately argue their cases, cheering for their preferred speakers with the same fervent enthusiasm as spectators at gladiatorial games. A young lawyer capable of winning challenging cases and swaying juries with eloquent speeches could find himself catapulted to fame and significant political opportunity almost overnight. Caesar's first major case involved the prosecution of Gnaeus Cornelius Dolabella, a former governor of Macedonia, who stood accused of extortion and abuse of power. This was a bold and audacious choice for a nascent advocate, as Dolabella was exceptionally well connected and defended by some of Rome's most formidable legal minds. However, Caesar had meticulously prepared his case, diligently gathering compelling testimony from Greek cities that had suffered under Dolabella's rapacious rule and assembling irrefutable evidence of corruption that proved impossible to disregard. The trial quickly became the fervent talk of Rome. Caesar's opening statement was delivered with such captivating eloquence and fervent passion that even his staunchest opponents grudgingly acknowledged his remarkable skill. He painted a vivid, agonizing portrait of provincial suffering under avaricious Roman rule, a depiction so moving that it stirred sympathy even among hardened senators. His Greek witnesses, meticulously coached in proper protocol, recounted their harrowing stories with a quiet dignity that sharply contrasted with the arrogant dismissals offered by Dolabella's defenders. Although Dolabella was ultimately acquitted, thanks in no small part to the pervasive influence of his powerful friends, Caesar's burgeoning reputation was firmly established. The legal community instantly recognized him as a rising star, while the common people deeply appreciated his willingness to confront corrupt officials who believed themselves to be beyond the reach of the law. More importantly, Caesar had gleaned invaluable lessons about the profound power of public opinion and the crucial importance of presenting complex issues in ways that ordinary citizens could readily comprehend and enthusiastically support. His success in the courts inevitably led to his election as quaestor, the initial rung on the venerable ladder of Roman political advancement. This position entailed administrative duties that some might have found tedious, but Caesar approached them with his characteristic boundless energy and meticulous attention to detail. He was assigned to further Spain, where he would serve under the praetor Antistius Vetus, diligently managing the province's finances and legal affairs. The journey to Spain transported Caesar along the ancient roads that, like vital arteries, bound the sprawling empire together, carrying the very lifeblood of civilization. These roads were engineering marvels, destined to endure for centuries, their stones fitted with such exquisite precision that weeds could barely find purchase between them. As his small entourage meticulously made its way across the majestic Pyrenees, Caesar could gaze down upon the vast, sweeping Iberian plains, where Roman legions had valiantly fought and died to extend the empire's formidable borders. In time, the path led him onward to the profound realization that Rome's enduring strength lay not in any singular, grand victory, but in the patient, relentless accumulation of countless small successes that, eventually, became utterly irresistible. Spain, ambition ignited and the art of command. Spain, in Caesar's era, remained a land still partially untamed, a realm where Roman civilization manifested as ordered islands surrounded by vast, untamed territories where ancient tribal customs and deeply ingrained loyalties held unwavering sway. The cities established by Roman colonists gleamed with familiar architectural grandeur, forums, temples, and aqueducts that could have been effortlessly transplanted directly from Italy. Yet, to venture beyond their protective walls was to step into a world where different gods were revered, where unfamiliar languages echoed, where warriors still brandished weapons carried by their grandfathers, and where Roman authority was more a theoretical concept than a tangible reality. Caesar's duties as quaestor necessitated extensive travel throughout the province, inspecting tax collection, meticulously settling legal disputes, and ensuring the proper administration of Roman law. These journeys provided him with an intimate, first-hand understanding of how the empire truly functioned at its furthest reaches. A world away from the gleaming marble halls of the capital, he learned to forge effective working relationships with local chieftains who had accepted Roman rule, to expertly navigate the complex relationships between veteran colonists and the indigenous populations, and to astutely discern which battles were worth fighting and which were best judiciously avoided. One evening, as Caesar diligently reviewed accounts by lamplight in a modest villa serving as his headquarters, he experienced what he would later describe as one of the most profound moments of his life. A messenger had arrived from Rome, bringing dispatches that included reports of speeches by various political figures and accounts of recent elections and trials. Among these reports was a vivid description of the latest triumphal procession, where a successful general had paraded his captives and spoils through cheering crowds, while rose petals descended like gentle snow from upper-story windows. The account mentioned, with a force that struck Caesar unexpectedly, that this triumphant general was precisely his own age. Here he was, meticulously handling provincial paperwork, while men no more talented than himself were achieving the kind of glory that resonated through the ages. Alexander the Great, he mused, had conquered half the known world by the very age Caesar had now attained. This thought filled him not with despair, but with a fierce, unyielding determination to make his indelible mark before time inevitably ran out. That night, unable to find sleep, Caesar stepped out onto the villa's small terrace and gazed up at the stars, which wheeled overhead in their eternal, majestic patterns. These same constellations had looked down upon Romulus as he founded the city, upon Scipio as he defeated Hannibal, and upon Pompey during his eastern conquests. They would continue their silent, cosmic dance long after every living Roman had returned to dust, yet some names, he knew, would be remembered as long as men recounted stories of greatness achieved and empires magnificently built. And so, the story flows onward, as ambition kindled within a young man's heart like a flame catching in dry tinder, bright, warm, and utterly transformative. Caesar's year in Spain proved profitable in more ways than one. His exceptional administrative competence ensured that the province's taxes flowed smoothly and efficiently to Rome, earning him high praise from his superiors and invaluable experience in the practical management of a vast empire. More importantly, he seized opportunities to lead small military expeditions against bandits and unconquered tribes, providing him with his first authentic taste of independent command. These were not grand, glorious campaigns destined to be celebrated in epic poems, but rather the arduous, unglamorous work that truly held the empire together. Caesar learned to march his men across scorching plains where the summer heat rose in shimmering waves, to locate precious water in country that appeared utterly barren, and to meticulously choose ground for camps that could be effectively defended against desperate night attacks by enemies who knew every rock and gully. He discovered within himself a natural, innate talent for the demanding life of a soldier. Unlike many aristocratic Romans who viewed military service as an unpleasant necessity, Caesar genuinely relished the camaraderie of the camp. The crystal-clear purpose that accompanied simple objectives, and the immediate, tangible feedback that distinguished successful tactics from failed ones. His men began to trust him implicitly, for he shared their hardships, eating the very same rations and sleeping under the same vast canopy of stars. More significantly, Caesar began to cultivate the distinctive personal style that would eventually solidify his reputation as the most beloved general in Roman history. He made it his personal mission to learn every soldier's name, to inquire genuinely about their families, and to recall intricate personal details from one conversation to the next. When men were wounded, he would visit them personally, and when they tragically died, he ensured that their families received not only the standard death benefits, but often additional assistance drawn from his own personal funds. This approach to leadership was highly unusual among Roman commanders, who typically maintained a strict social distance from their troops. Caesar's critics would later argue that he was dangerously populist, asserting that his easy familiarity with common soldiers undermined proper military discipline. But Caesar grasped something fundamental that eluded his more conventional colleagues. In an era where civil wars were becoming increasingly prevalent, the unwavering loyalty of the legions might prove immeasurably more valuable than the fleeting approval of the Senate. Personal tragedy and political ascent. His return to Rome was, tragically, overshadowed by a profound personal loss that would cast a long shadow over the remainder of his life. Cornelia, his deeply beloved wife, succumbed to one of the pervasive fevers that regularly swept through the crowded neighborhoods of the ancient city during his absence. The devastating news reached him just as he was meticulously preparing to embark for Italy, transforming what should have been a triumphant homecoming into a solemn journey of mourning. The funeral was an intensely moving affair, a poignant testament to the genuine affection Caesar had harbored for his young wife. Defying all established precedent, he delivered a public eulogy for Cornelia, praising not only her virtue and beauty, but also her keen intelligence and remarkable strength of character. Roman women were typically honored in death with brief, formulaic tributes, but Caesar spoke from the very depths of his heart about a cherished partnership that had been tragically cut short. His visible, raw grief garnered him profound sympathy throughout the city and eloquently demonstrated a capacity for deep emotion that many had not previously suspected. In time, the path led him onward to new, strategic alliances and fresh, burgeoning opportunities. As the widowed young politician began to navigate the perilous currents of Roman ambition with burgeoning skill and unwavering confidence, the Rome that welcomed Caesar back from Spain was a city in flux. Old certainties were crumbling, relentlessly challenged by new realities at every turn. The traditional mechanisms of republican government, meticulously designed for a city-state presiding over a modest territory in central Italy, were now visibly straining under the immense weight of administering an empire that stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Ambitious men were beginning to grasp the stark reality that conventional political careers might no longer suffice to achieve their grand aspirations. Caesar's subsequent ascent on the traditional ladder of advancement was his election to the aedileship. This position, while perhaps appearing modest to modern observers, held enormous potential for an ambitious and astute politician. The aediles bore the weighty responsibility for organizing public games and festivals, meticulously maintaining public buildings, and overseeing the vital markets that nourished Rome's burgeoning population. Most significantly, they were afforded unparalleled opportunities to expend colossal sums on lavish entertainments that would undoubtedly win the fervent gratitude of the common people. Caesar approached his aedile duties with characteristic boundless energy and vivid imagination. He keenly understood that in a city where only a minute fraction of citizens could directly participate in political debates, public spectacles served as the primary, most potent means by which politicians communicated with the vast masses. The games he meticulously organized were so utterly spectacular that they became the fervent talk of Rome. Featuring gladiatorial contests of unprecedented scale and astonishing variety, wild beast hunts that brought exotic animals from the distant lands of Africa and Asia, and theatrical performances that artfully combined captivating entertainment with subtle, yet impactful, political messaging. The expenses incurred were colossal, far exceeding what Caesar could possibly afford from his own personal resources. He borrowed heavily from moneylenders, mortgaged his ancestral family property, and entered into daring financial arrangements that would have irrevocably bankrupted a less ambitious man. His critics whispered, with barely concealed disdain, that he was courting ruin for the sake of fleeting popularity. But Caesar, ever the master strategist, was engaged in a far longer, more intricate game. He understood that debt could serve as a powerful tool as well as a burdensome obligation, binding creditors to his eventual success while simultaneously demonstrating unwavering confidence in his future prospects. The Bon Die's scandal and political acumen. One of his most widely applauded innovations during this period was the restoration of statues and monuments honoring Gaius Marius, the venerable general who had been Sulla's sworn enemy, and whose memory had been officially condemned during the years of Optimate control. Caesar's workers meticulously replaced these monuments quietly, under the cloak of pre-dawn hours, when the forum was almost entirely empty. Yet by morning, all of Rome was abuzz with the momentous news. Veterans who had valiantly served under Marius wept openly upon seeing their old commander's image restored to its rightful honor, while younger citizens were powerfully reminded that there had been heroes before Pompey and viable alternatives to aristocratic rule. This carefully calculated gesture was a masterful stroke of political theater, eloquently demonstrating Caesar's rapidly developing sophistication as a populist politician. He had honored the revered memory of a great Roman without directly challenging current authority. He had skillfully appealed to military veterans without appearing to threaten civilian control. And crucially, he had positioned himself as an unwavering champion of the people without resorting to crude demagoguery. The Optimates were absolutely furious but could find no legitimate legal grounds for prosecution, while the populace began to recognize Caesar as a formidable potential leader for their faction. And so, the story flows onward, as the astute young politician learned to make every gesture count, and every expenditure serve multiple purposes within the intricate and treacherous game of Roman power. Caesar's resounding success as aedile inexorably led to his election as praetor, the subsequent rung on the esteemed Roman political hierarchy. This was a position imbued with genuine authority, entailing significant judicial responsibilities and the tantalizing potential for military command, which could, in turn, lead to enduring fame. However, Caesar's path to the praetorship was significantly complicated by one of the most remarkable religious controversies in Roman history, a scandal that very nearly destroyed his nascent career before it had truly begun. The scandal revolved around the clandestine festival of Bona Dea, the Good Goddess, one of Rome's most ancient and enigmatic religious observances. This was an exclusively women-only ceremony, held annually in the home of a senior magistrate, where Roman matrons and their daughters would gather to perform secret rituals. These rites were believed to ensure the fertility of the land and the sacred protection of the state. Men were strictly forbidden from any involvement in the proceedings. Even male servants and slaves were banished from the house for the duration of the ceremony. In the year of Caesar's praetorship, the festival was held in his own home, presided over by his wife, Pompeia, whom he had married after Cornelia's death. The night unfolded normally until one of the female attendants made a shocking discovery: a man concealed among the women, disguised in women's clothing, apparently attempting to spy on the sacred mysteries. The intruder was identified as Publius Clodius Pulcher, a young aristocrat infamous for his scandalous reputation and a penchant for generating chaos wherever he ventured. The religious ramifications of Clodius's sacrilege were colossal. Roman state religion was not a matter of personal belief, but of collective ritual obligations that meticulously maintained the favor of the gods. If these sacred ceremonies were polluted by a male presence, the potential consequences included plague, famine, military defeat, or any number of divine punishments that would profoundly affect all citizens. The College of Pontiffs, Rome's most senior religious authorities, solemnly declared that the entire festival would have to be repeated, accompanied by elaborate purification rituals. The political implications were equally grave. Clodius vehemently claimed he had been nowhere near Caesar's house on the night in question, but his alibi was transparently false, and his motives were undeniably scandalous. Some whispered that he had been engaged in an affair with Pompeia, while others speculated that his true objective was to publicly humiliate Caesar by orchestrating a religious scandal that would effectively destroy his political prospects. Caesar's response to this crisis was, characteristically, swift and decisive. He immediately divorced Pompeia, famously declaring the immortal words, "Caesar's wife must be above suspicion." He made it unequivocally clear that he possessed no personal knowledge of any wrongdoing by his wife, but asserted that the mere association with scandal was utterly incompatible with his public position. This gesture was both politically astute and personally agonizing. Sacrificing a marriage that had brought him happiness for the sake of his burgeoning career. The trial of Clodius evolved into one of the most celebrated legal proceedings of the era. The prosecution, spearheaded by some of Rome's most eloquent orators, painted the defendant as a dangerous enemy of both religion and public order. The defense, equally skilled, attempted to portray the entire affair as a youthful prank that had been exaggerated out of proportion by political enemies. Caesar himself was summoned as a witness, and his testimony was eagerly anticipated by the throngs that packed the forum. In time, the path led him onward to a decision that would eloquently demonstrate both his profound political wisdom and his remarkable ability to discern long-term strategy beyond immediate advantage. When Caesar took the witness stand, all of Rome held its breath in rapt anticipation. This was the pivotal moment when he could, with a mere handful of words, utterly destroy Clodius, thereby eliminating a formidable potential rival and unequivocally demonstrating his unwavering commitment to religious propriety. The prosecution had meticulously prepared their questions, confident that Caesar would robustly support their case with decisive testimony concerning the events that had transpired within his own home. Instead, Caesar delivered one of the most surprising testimonies in the annals of Roman legal history. He stated, with disarming simplicity, that he possessed no direct knowledge of Clodius's presence at the ceremony, had not personally observed any sacrilege, and therefore could not swear to facts he had not personally witnessed. While technically truthful, this testimony was utterly unhelpful to the prosecution and effectively sabotaged their case. Clodius was ultimately acquitted by the narrowest of margins, and Caesar, unexpectedly, found himself with a burgeoning ally who would prove invaluable in future political skirmishes. This testimony vividly revealed Caesar's increasing maturity as a politician. He had astutely recognized that Clodius, despite his obvious flaws, possessed talents that could be strategically useful to the popular's faction. The young aristocrat was a naturally gifted demagogue, capable of swaying crowds with fiery oratory, and his extensive family connections provided him with influence among groups that might otherwise be beyond reach. By helping to secure his acquittal, Caesar was strategically investing in future cooperation rather than pursuing immediate, albeit satisfying, revenge. Proconsulship in Spain and the seeds of imperial ambition. Caesar's praetorship proved to be an exceptional training ground for the formidable challenges that lay ahead. His judicial duties demanded that he meticulously balance competing interests and discover practical, equitable solutions to complex legal dilemmas. He exhibited particular acumen in commercial disputes, demonstrating a profound understanding of economic issues that would serve him exceptionally well in his later administrative roles. More significantly, he leveraged his influential position to cultivate extensive networks of obligation and profound gratitude that permeated throughout Roman society. His Praetorian province was further Spain, the very same region where he had previously served as quaestor, but now endowed with full executive authority. This appointment came with significant military responsibilities, finally granting Caesar the coveted opportunity to achieve the kind of glory that could, overnight, utterly transform a political career. The tribes of northwestern Iberia had been relentlessly raiding Roman settlements, and the provincial governor preceding Caesar had demonstrably failed to restore order, despite several costly campaigns. Caesar approached his Spanish command with meticulous and unparalleled preparation. He painstakingly studied the reports of his predecessors, discerning their tactical errors and strategic oversights. He interviewed veterans who had served in the region, assiduously learning about the local terrain, capricious weather patterns, and intricate tribal customs. Most importantly, he began actively recruiting a personal staff of extraordinarily talented young men who would serve as his indispensable eyes and ears throughout the arduous campaign. The army he assembled, while modest by the standards of major Roman campaigns, consisting of perhaps 10,000 legionaries supported by auxiliary troops and cavalry, was hand-picked by Caesar himself. He chose officers who shared his audacious vision of aggressive, mobile warfare. He also ensured that his soldiers were equipped with the finest weapons and armor that money could procure, reasoning that superior equipment could exponentially multiply the effectiveness of well-trained troops. And so, the story flows onward. As Caesar prepared to test himself in the ultimate proving ground of Roman ambition, where military success could elevate a man to heights that political skill alone could never aspire to reach. The campaigns that unfolded in Spain were Caesar's first truly independent military commands, and they unveiled capabilities that would, in time, irrevocably reshape the ancient world. Unlike his predecessors, who had attempted to subjugate the Iberian tribes through massive, frontal assaults, Caesar implemented a revolutionary strategy of rapid movement and concentrated strikes that kept his enemies perpetually off balance and utterly incapable of coordinating their resistance. His initial objective was a tribal confederation that controlled the mountainous regions overlooking the Roman coastal settlements. Previous governors had typically attempted to besiege their hilltop fortresses, usually abandoning the effort when the onset of autumn weather rendered supply lines impossible to maintain. Caesar, in a display of tactical brilliance, chose instead to attack during winter, a season when the tribes assumed they were entirely safe from Roman interference. The march through snow-covered mountain passes swiftly became legendary among his troops. Caesar shared every hardship, walking alongside his men when the treacherous terrain became too difficult for horses, personally assisting in carrying supplies when pack animals faltered, and diligently maintaining morale through personal example rather than harsh discipline. When advance scouts reported that a crucial pass was blocked by an unexpected avalanche, Caesar personally led the engineering efforts to clear the path, wielding a shovel alongside common soldiers until the route was once again passable. The surprise winter assault achieved complete and stunning success. The tribal warriors, caught utterly unprepared for warfare in the depths of winter, found themselves facing disciplined Roman legions that moved with an astonishing precision even in the harshest conditions. Caesar's victory was not merely tactical. It was profoundly psychological, powerfully demonstrating that Roman arms could reach anywhere, in any season, whenever duty imperatively demanded. The defeated chieftains were treated with honor. Their followers were offered opportunities to serve as Roman auxiliaries, and the conquered territories were organized with the efficient administration that would become a hallmark of all Caesar's later achievements. More victories followed in rapid succession as Caesar's formidable reputation spread like wildfire throughout the peninsula. Tribes that might have resisted for years chose instead to negotiate, shrewdly recognizing that accommodation with Rome offered significantly more advantages than feudal resistance. Caesar's approach to these negotiations revealed the sophisticated diplomatic skills that would later serve him so exceptionally well in Gaul and beyond. He understood deeply that lasting conquests demanded not merely military defeat, but the profound transformation of enemies into willing allies, of conquered peoples into eager participants within the grand Roman system. The immense wealth that flowed from these campaigns finally liberated Caesar from the crushing debts he had meticulously accumulated throughout his political career. Spanish gold and silver inundated the military treasury, providing ample funds for generous bonuses that cemented his soldiers' unwavering devotion to his cause, while also enabling him to repay his numerous creditors in Rome with interest. More critically, these campaigns had bestowed upon him the irrefutable military credibility that was absolutely essential for advancement to the highest echelons of Roman politics. His return to Rome was a meticulously orchestrated affair, designed to maximize political impact. Instead of requesting a formal triumph, which would have compelled him to remain outside the city until the elaborate ceremony could be arranged, Caesar chose to enter Rome quietly and immediately declare his candidacy for the consulship. This astute decision vividly revealed his burgeoning political sophistication, his keen understanding that immediate action was often far more valuable than elaborate ceremonial recognition. The consular campaign that ensued was one of the most expensive and fiercely competitive in Roman history. Caesar faced truly formidable opponents, including Marcus Bibulus, a respected conservative who commanded the full backing of the Optimates and possessed virtually unlimited financial resources. The contest swiftly devolved into a proxy war between the Populars and Optimates factions, with colossal sums lavished on bribery, lavish entertainment, and pervasive propaganda that permeated every corner of the city. In time, the path led him inexorably onward to the ultimate prize that had been his driving ambition since youth, the consulship. A position that would firmly place him among the most powerful men in the known world. The first consulship. Power and confrontation. Caesar's election to the consulship marked a profound turning point, not merely in his own illustrious career, but in the very history of the Roman Republic itself. The campaign had been so fiercely bitter and exorbitantly expensive that it left enduring wounds within the body politic. While the audacious methods employed by both sides pushed the boundaries of acceptable political behavior ever further towards outright warfare, Caesar's victory, though narrow, was unequivocally decisive, and it propelled him to the pinnacle of constitutional authority at the precise moment to implement the grand strategy that had been meticulously taking shape within his mind for years. His colleague in the consulship was Marcus Bibulus, his erstwhile rival, who had been strategically chosen by the Optimates as their champion. Roman tradition expected the two consuls to work harmoniously, sharing power and responsibility in a collegiate manner, which was ostensibly designed to prevent any single individual from accumulating excessive authority. However, Caesar harbored no intention of sharing power with a man who represented everything he vehemently opposed, and Bibulus proved equally unwilling to compromise with someone he regarded as a dangerous radical. The conflict between the consuls erupted almost immediately over Caesar's proposed land law, a comprehensive and ambitious measure designed to provide farms for veterans and the urban poor, while simultaneously addressing the pressing economic problems that were severely destabilizing Roman society. The proposal itself was not particularly radical by the standards of earlier populist legislation, but it undeniably threatened the vested interests of wealthy landowners who had profited immensely from the current system of concentrated ownership. When Bibulus attempted to obstruct the legislation through traditional constitutional means, Caesar responded with tactics that genuinely shocked even his most ardent supporters. He bypassed the Senate entirely, taking his proposal directly to the popular assemblies and employing techniques of mass persuasion that transformed political debate into something akin to vibrant street theater. The crowds that congregated in the forum to hear Caesar speak were unlike anything Rome had ever witnessed before, drawn not merely from the traditional citizen base, but from the vast urban masses who had previously been excluded from meaningful political participation. Caesar's oratory during this tumultuous period reached heights that firmly established him as one of the greatest speakers in Roman history. His speeches masterfully combined logical argument with profound emotional appeal, sophisticated political theory with tangible promises of immediate benefit. He spoke directly to the urgent concerns of ordinary Romans, veterans who desperately needed land, urban workers who struggled to feed their families, and small farmers who were being relentlessly driven off their ancestral holdings by slave-worked estates. His words carried profound conviction because they addressed genuine problems with concrete, actionable solutions. The confrontation reached its dramatic climax when Bibulus attempted to physically obstruct the passage of Caesar's law by appearing in the forum with a small band of supporters. The ensuing riot was brief but decisively impactful. Bibulus was roughly handled by Caesar's fervent partisans. His fasces were broken, and a basket of dung was ignominiously poured over his head, a humiliation that powerfully symbolized the collapse of traditional senatorial authority. From that day forward, Bibulus remained secluded in his house, issuing ineffective proclamations that futilely declared all of Caesar's acts invalid, while Caesar governed Rome as if he were the sole consul. And so, the story flows onward, as the Roman Republic took another inexorable step toward the precipice that would ultimately destroy it. Guided by a man who fundamentally believed that bold action was infinitely preferable to noble inaction, the transformation of Caesar's consulship into a virtual monarchy shocked Roman traditionalists to their core, but it undeniably delighted the common people, who were finally witnessing their interests represented by someone with the legitimate power to act. Caesar's land law was swiftly passed and immediately began the systematic redistribution of public lands to deserving veterans and impoverished citizens. His other legislative initiatives addressed crucial issues such as debt relief, provincial administration, and the expansion of citizenship rights. Demonstrating both his profound understanding of Rome's deep-seated problems and his unwavering determination to solve them, regardless of constitutional niceties. Perhaps most significantly, Caesar leveraged his consular authority to forge a formidable alliance that would dominate Roman politics for the next decade. This powerful partnership, known to historians as the First Triumvirate, brought together three of the most influential men in Rome: Caesar himself, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Each brought distinct strengths to the alliance. Caesar provided unparalleled political skill and fervent popular support. Pompey contributed immense military prestige and the unwavering loyalty of his veterans, while Crassus offered the vast wealth that rendered ambitious projects genuinely possible. The alliance was further cemented by a marriage between Caesar's daughter, Julia, and Pompey, a union that surprised Rome with its genuine affection, despite its undeniably political origins. Julia was barely 20, intelligent and beautiful, while Pompey was nearly twice her age and had been married several times before. Yet, the couple appeared genuinely devoted to each other, and their evident happiness added a rare human dimension to what might otherwise have been perceived as a purely cynical arrangement. As his consulship neared its conclusion, Caesar faced the ominous prospect that his numerous enemies would attempt to prosecute him for the various constitutional violations he had committed during his year in office. Roman law offered some degree of protection through the concept of provocatio, which allowed citizens to appeal death sentences to the popular assemblies. However, Caesar's innovations had been so sweeping that traditional legal protections might prove woefully inadequate. The solution lay in securing a proconsular command, which would provide him with imperium, the legal authority that would grant him immunity from prosecution while simultaneously presenting him with the invaluable opportunity to win the military glory. Why that could render him unassailable. The available provinces were not particularly appealing, peaceful territories that offered little opportunity for conquest or lucrative profit. But Caesar's allies in the Senate, working in concert with tribunes who could wield the threat of vetoes, managed to arrange something truly unprecedented: a 5-year command in Gaul. which would grant him authority over both the civilized province of Gallia Narbonensis and the vast, unconquered territories beyond the Alps. The appointment seemed almost too good to be true. And indeed, many senators voted for it precisely because they believed it would either ultimately destroy Caesar or, at the very least, remove him from the Roman political landscape for many years to come. Gaul was widely known to be populous and fiercely warlike, brimming with tribes that had steadfastly resisted Roman expansion for generations. Previous governors had been content to merely maintain the existing boundaries and collect taxes from peaceful regions, fully understanding that major campaigns would be both exorbitantly expensive and exceptionally dangerous. In time, the path led him onward to the greatest adventure of his life, a series of campaigns that would add immense territories to the Roman Empire while forever immortalizing Caesar's name. The Gallic Wars, conquest and masterful strategy. The Gaul that Caesar encountered upon assuming his command was a land of extraordinary diversity and profound complexity, far removed from the simplistic barbarian stereotype that many Romans harbored. The region encompassed vast territories stretching from the sun-drenched Mediterranean coast to the rugged English Channel, and from the Rhine River to the vast Atlantic Ocean. Inhabited by dozens of distinct tribes that, while speaking related languages, maintained their own unique cultures and often harbored conflicting interests. Some Gallic tribes, particularly those situated in the south, had been in continuous contact with Roman civilization for generations. Their nobles proudly wore Roman-style clothing. Their children learned Latin alongside their native tongues, and their warriors occasionally served as auxiliaries in Roman armies. These tribes had readily adopted Roman agricultural techniques, sophisticated urban planning, and advanced commercial practices, all while steadfastly preserving their own cherished religious traditions and intricate social structures. Further north, however, lay territories that remained largely untouched by Mediterranean influence. Here, Celtic warriors still fought with the very weapons their ancestors had wielded. Druids performed ancient and mysterious sacrifices in sacred groves, and tribal assemblies rendered decisions according to customs that predated the very founding of Rome. These peoples were far from primitive. They possessed sophisticated metalwork skills, elaborate legal systems, and rich oral traditions that preserved historical knowledge with remarkable accuracy. Yet they were also fiercely independent and deeply suspicious of any foreign interference. Caesar's first major challenge arose from an unexpected quarter, the Helvetii, a formidable tribe from what is now Switzerland, who had decided to undertake a mass migration to new territories in western Gaul. This colossal movement involved hundreds of thousands of people, warriors and their families, vast herds of cattle, and all the possessions that a nomadic people could possibly carry. Such a migration would, by necessity, involve traversing Roman territory, and the profound disruption it would inflict upon established tribal boundaries might well trigger conflicts that could rapidly spread throughout the entire region. The Helvetii dispatched ambassadors to Caesar, respectfully requesting permission to pass through the Roman province, promising to cause no damage and to compensate for any supplies they might need to purchase. Their request was not unreasonable by the prevailing standards of tribal diplomacy, and many Roman governors would likely have granted permission in exchange for appropriate guarantees and tribute. But Caesar, ever the opportunist, perceived in the Helvetian migration an invaluable opportunity, too significant to disregard. He flatly refused permission for the crossing, citing concerns about the security of Roman territory and the welfare of allied tribes. When the Helvetii attempted to find alternative routes, Caesar decisively declared that their movements constituted a direct threat to Roman interests, and immediately began mobilizing his legions for what would become the first of his monumental Gallic campaigns. The war that ensued was brief but utterly decisive, eloquently demonstrating both Caesar's military genius and his remarkable ability to transform potential problems into advantageous opportunities. The Helvetii, burdened by their families and possessions, simply could not match the unparalleled mobility of Caesar's legions. At the Battle of Bibracte, Caesar achieved a complete and stunning victory that not only halted the migration but also firmly established his burgeoning reputation as a general capable of achieving the seemingly impossible. And so, the story flows onward. As Caesar embarked upon the conquest that would fundamentally reshape the map of Europe and transform him from a merely successful politician into one of history's most formidable military commanders. The resounding victory over the Helvetii was merely the prologue to Caesar's sprawling Gallic adventure. Word of his astonishing success spread with remarkable rapidity throughout the region, bringing him urgent requests for assistance from tribal leaders who perceived Roman military might as the ultimate solution to their own localized problems. One such urgent request came from the Aedui and other tribes who were gravely threatened by Ariovistus, a formidable German king who had crossed the Rhine with a vast army and was attempting to establish a permanent kingdom in Gallic territory. Caesar's audacious decision to intervene against Ariovistus was highly controversial, even among his own seasoned officers. The German king had been officially recognized as a friend and ally by the Roman Senate, and his activities in Gaul could reasonably be interpreted as internal barbarian affairs that did not directly concern Roman interests. Some of Caesar's lieutenants argued vociferously that he was exceeding his authority and risking unnecessary complications with peoples who had not directly threatened Roman territory. But Caesar profoundly understood that the precedent established by his response to Ariovistus would decisively determine the future course of Roman policy in Gaul. If he permitted a German warlord to establish an independent kingdom beyond the Roman frontier, other ambitious leaders would undoubtedly be encouraged to similar ventures. The delicate balance of power that had maintained relative stability on the frontier would be irrevocably upset, potentially creating formidable threats that would demand much larger and far more expensive military responses in the future. The campaign against Ariovistus evolved into a masterpiece of psychological warfare, as well as a brilliant display of military strategy. Caesar keenly recognized that his enemy's greatest advantage lay in the fearsome reputation of German warriors, who were widely regarded as larger, stronger, and more ferocious than their Gallic or Roman counterparts. Many of Caesar's own soldiers had never confronted Germanic opponents, and were understandably nervous about the impending battle. Caesar addressed these concerns through a potent combination of practical preparation and inspirational leadership. He ensured his troops were exceptionally well equipped and thoroughly trained. But he also seized every opportunity to remind them of their superior discipline, impeccable organization, and unmatched tactical flexibility. When alarming rumors spread through the camp that the Germans were invincible in battle, Caesar summoned his officers and delivered one of the most compelling speeches of his entire military career. He reminded his men that they were the proud inheritors of a military tradition stretching back to the legendary founders of Rome, that they carried the revered eagles that had conquered the civilized world, and that no barbarian army had ever been able to withstand disciplined Roman legions fighting on ground of their own choosing. His confidence was so utterly absolute, and his arguments so profoundly persuasive that the mood in the camp transformed overnight, from nervous apprehension to eager anticipation. The battle itself was almost anticlimactic. When the two armies finally clashed, the Germans swiftly discovered that Roman organization and superior equipment more than compensated for any individual advantages they might have possessed. Ariovistus's forces were routed so completely that the king himself barely escaped across the Rhine with a mere handful of followers, leaving behind a vast plunder of weapons, supplies, and prisoners that richly enhanced Caesar's veterans and unequivocally demonstrated Roman superiority to every tribe in Gaul. In time, the path led him onward to challenges that would test not only his military skills but also his profound ability to understand and skillfully manipulate the complex political relationships that intricately bound together the entire Celtic world, unifying Gaul and the rise of Vercingetorix. The decisive defeat of Ariovistus firmly established Caesar as the dominant military force in Gaul. However, it simultaneously created new problems that would demand the full breadth of his diplomatic skills to resolve. The German king's swift and dramatic collapse had profoundly upset the delicate balance of power throughout the region, creating fresh opportunities for ambitious tribal leaders while also generating pervasive fears about Roman intentions. Some Gallic nobles viewed Caesar as a potential ally who could help them achieve their own self-serving goals, while others perceived him as an existential threat to traditional independence that needed to be fiercely resisted before it became overwhelming. Caesar spent the winter months following his victory meticulously establishing an intricate network of alliances and obligations that would serve as the foundational bedrock for Roman rule in Gaul. He keenly understood that lasting conquest required far more than mere military success. It demanded the astute creation of new political structures that could effectively replace the traditional tribal system while preserving enough familiar elements to maintain popular acceptance. His approach to Gallic politics strikingly revealed the same sophisticated understanding of human motivation that had served him so exceptionally well in Rome. He astutely identified the natural leaders within each community, the men whose authority stemmed from inherent personal qualities rather than solely from traditional position. And he diligently worked to bind them to Roman interests through a cunning combination of threats and rewards. Some were granted the coveted Roman citizenship. Others were given prestigious command positions in auxiliary units, and still others were permitted to retain their traditional authority, provided they consistently cooperated with Roman policy. This strategy proved remarkably effective, yet it also sowed the seeds of deep resentments that would eventually explode into the greatest crisis of Caesar's illustrious career. Traditional Gallic leaders who had been bypassed in favor of Roman collaborators began to systematically organize resistance movements, drawing fervent support from those who felt that their ancient customs and cherished freedoms were being sacrificed to foreign domination. The first major test of Caesar's Gallic settlement came from an unexpected quarter, the Belgae, a formidable confederation of tribes from the northeastern regions who had remained strictly neutral during the earlier campaigns, but now felt profoundly threatened by the relentless expansion of Roman influence. The Belgae were renowned throughout Gaul for their fierce independence and formidable military prowess, and their decision to unite against Rome represented a challenge of an entirely different magnitude from anything Caesar had previously confronted. The Belgic Confederation could field armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, drawn from tribes that had never known defeat and led by valiant warriors who had inherited centuries of military tradition. Their formidable alliance included not only the major tribal groups but also Germanic settlers who had crossed the Rhine in earlier generations, and smaller communities that viewed Roman expansion as an existential threat to their very way of life. Caesar's decisive response to the Belgic threat powerfully demonstrated his growing mastery of large-scale military operations. Instead of patiently waiting for the enemy to complete their preparations, he struck first, boldly dividing his forces to simultaneously attack multiple tribal centers while skillfully utilizing his diplomatic contacts to prevent the Confederation from achieving complete unity. The campaigns that followed were among the most challenging of his career, demanding that he constantly adapt his tactics to confront enemies who intimately knew their own terrain and fought with desperate courage. And so, the story flows onward. As Caesar learned that true conquest required not merely victory in battle, but the painstaking work of building new societies from the ashes of the old. The Belgic Wars tested Caesar's legions in ways that previous campaigns had not, compelling Roman soldiers to fight in dense, unfamiliar forests where their traditional tactical advantages were severely minimized, and to assault fortified positions that seemed utterly impregnable. The Belgae had learned valuable lessons from the defeats of other Gallic tribes, astutely adopting defensive strategies that maximized their natural advantages while skillfully minimizing Roman superiority in open-field battles. One of the most memorable engagements of the campaign was the arduous siege of the Aduatuci, a tribe that had sought refuge in a massive hilltop fortress that commanded the surrounding countryside. The fortress was considered impregnable by local standards, protected by steep, unscalable cliffs on three sides and accessible only through a narrow approach that could be easily defended by a mere handful of resolute warriors. Previous Roman commanders might have attempted to starve out the tenacious defenders or negotiated some face-saving compromise that would have allowed both sides to claim a hollow victory. Caesar, however, chose instead to spectacularly demonstrate Roman engineering capabilities in a display that swiftly became legendary throughout Gaul. His legions constructed siege works of unprecedented complexity, including towering structures that rose higher than the fortress walls and powerful artillery engines capable of hurling stones with devastating accuracy. The Agiatusi, who had never witnessed such machines, initially scoffed at what they presumed were Roman toys. Their laughter quickly transmuted into terror when the siege engines commenced their relentless bombardment, shattering stone walls that had stood firm for generations and making it chillingly clear that no defensive position could possibly withstand Roman determination. The psychological impact of the siege was as profound as its military results. Word swiftly spread throughout Gaul that Caesar possessed weapons capable of breaching any fortification, knowledge that would render future sieges shorter and less costly as defenders wisely chose to render over hopeless resistance. More critically, the siege powerfully demonstrated Caesar's unwavering willingness to invest enormous resources in achieving complete victory. A crucial lesson that was not lost on tribal leaders who might have been contemplating further resistance. The decisive defeat of the Belgae effectively completed Caesar's conquest of central and northern Gaul, yet it also starkly revealed the sheer magnitude of the task he had undertaken. The territories now firmly under Roman control encompassed an area larger than Italy itself, inhabited by perhaps 10 million people who spoke dozens of different languages and adhered to countless local customs. Transforming this vast, diverse region into a stable Roman province would demand administrative skills of the highest order and military forces capable of maintaining order across seemingly impossible distances. Caesar's ingenious solution was to implement a system of indirect rule that meticulously preserved the outward appearance of traditional authority, while unequivocally ensuring Roman control over crucial decisions. Tribal leaders who consistently demonstrated loyalty to Rome were permitted to retain their positions and exercise considerable autonomy in local affairs. However, they profoundly understood that their authority ultimately derived from Roman approval and could be instantly withdrawn at any given time. This system functioned effectively as long as Roman military superiority remained unquestioned. But it also contained inherent instabilities that would eventually threaten everything Caesar had so painstakingly achieved. The collaborative leaders who governed in Rome's name were often perceived by their own people as traitors who had callously sold their birthright for foreign rewards, while traditional authorities who had been displaced constantly plotted to regain their former positions. In time, the path led him onward to the most dangerous phase of his Gallic adventure, when suppressed resentments would violently explode into a rebellion that would test his skills as never before. Britain, rebellion, and the gathering storm. The years immediately following the Belgic conquest were marked by a series of smaller, yet significant, campaigns that gradually extended Roman authority to the farthest corners of Gaul. Caesar's legions boldly crossed the Rhine to punish German tribes that had been actively supporting Gallic resistance, ventured into the mysterious, dense forests of the Ardennes to subdue rebellious communities, and even launched daring expeditions across the narrow waters that separated Gaul from the enigmatic island of Britain. The British expeditions, though limited in their initial scope, profoundly captured the imagination of Romans who had grown up hearing fantastical stories about the mysterious island at the very edge of the world. Britain was rumored to be exceptionally rich in tin and other valuable metals, inhabited by fierce, painted warriors who worshipped strange gods in sacred groves. Some claimed that the island was perpetually shrouded in an impenetrable mist, while others insisted it was populated by towering giants or bizarre creatures that were part human and part beast. Caesar's initial crossing of the Channel was more an armed reconnaissance than a full-scale invasion, but it served its purpose admirably by demonstrating that Roman arms could reach anywhere, no matter how remote or supposedly impregnable. The awe-inspiring sight of Roman eagles firmly planted on British beaches sent an unequivocal message throughout the Celtic world: no natural barrier, however formidable, could ultimately protect those who dared to oppose Rome's relentless expansion. The expedition also furnished Caesar with invaluable intelligence concerning British society and their military capabilities. He discovered that the island was far from the primitive wasteland some had imagined. Rather, it was a complex civilization boasting sophisticated metalwork, elaborate fortifications, and intricate political structures that rivaled those of Gaul. The British tribes maintained extensive trade networks, fielded disciplined armies, and possessed formidable naval capabilities that had enabled them to intervene in Gallic affairs for generations. Caesar's second British expedition was significantly larger and more ambitious, involving 2 full legions and additional auxiliary forces, bringing the total invasion army to perhaps 25,000 men. The landing was fiercely opposed by British forces who had learned from the previous year's experience, but Roman discipline and superior equipment eventually prevailed. Caesar's forces penetrated deep into the British interior, winning several decisive battles and extracting tribute from defeated tribes before returning to Gaul with valuable hostages and rich plunder that unequivocally demonstrated the campaign's success. The British expeditions greatly enhanced Caesar's reputation throughout the entire Roman world, providing him with the kind of exotic achievements that truly distinguished great commanders from merely successful ones. However, they also dangerously extended his commitments at a time when his position in Gaul was becoming increasingly precarious, and they diverted critical resources that might have been more effectively utilized to consolidate his existing conquests. And so, the story flows onward, as Caesar's very successes began to unwittingly create the conditions that would lead to his greatest crisis, teaching him that in the relentless game of empire, every victory inevitably begets new challenges that must be overcome. The crisis that would test every fiber of what Caesar had achieved in Gaul began to coalesce in the winter of 54 to 53 BCE, when a series of seemingly unrelated incidents conspired to create a perfect storm of rebellion. The immediate catalyst was a severe grain shortage that compelled Caesar to disperse his legions among several winter camps, rather than concentrating them in secure, centralized positions. This dispersal, though a military necessity, inadvertently created opportune moments for enemies who had patiently awaited signs of Roman weakness. The first devastating blow struck the camp of Sabinus and Cotta, 2 of Caesar's most experienced lieutenants, who were wintering with a legion and a half in the territory of the Eburones. The local chieftain Ambiorix cunningly convinced the Romans that they faced immediate peril from a German invasion, and deceptively offered to provide safe passage to another Roman camp if they would abandon their current position. Against their better judgment, the Roman commanders reluctantly agreed to march, and their column was brutally ambushed in a densely forested valley, where their tactical advantages were utterly nullified. The catastrophic destruction of Sabinus and Cotta's force was the worst military disaster Caesar had endured in Gaul, and news of the devastating defeat spread rapidly and widely throughout the region. Suddenly, tribes that had seemed securely pacified began to reconsider their allegiance to Rome, while traditional leaders who had been patiently waiting for an opportune moment to reclaim power emerged from hiding to meticulously organize formidable resistance movements. The most perilous development was the emergence of a coordinated rebellion that united tribes across vast distances in a common, desperate effort to expel Roman forces from Gaul. This was not merely the spontaneous uprising of a single community, but rather a meticulously planned campaign that demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking and impressively coordinated organizational capabilities. The rebels had learned from their earlier defeats, astutely adopting tactics that neutralized Roman advantages while skillfully maximizing their own strengths. Caesar's response to this mounting crisis powerfully revealed his abilities as a military commander at their absolute pinnacle. Despite being vastly outnumbered by odds that would have daunted a lesser general, he vehemently refused to consider retreat or compromise. Instead, he immediately embarked on a series of rapid, Relentless marches that brought desperately needed relief to his scattered forces, while simultaneously demonstrating to both friend and foe alike that Roman power remained unbroken and unyielding. The winter campaign that followed was one of the most remarkable achievements in military history. With snow blanketing the ground and vital supply lines constantly imperiled by enemy action, Caesar's legions moved with astonishing clockwork precision from one threatened position to another. His personal leadership during this grueling period became legendary among his troops, who witnessed their commanders sharing every hardship and danger, all while maintaining the unwavering confidence and good humor that had made him so beloved. The decisive moment arrived when Caesar learned that Quintus Cicero, brother of the famous orator and one of his most trusted subordinates, was besieged in his winter camp by overwhelming enemy forces. The situation was dire, with Cicero's garrison reduced to a mere handful of effective soldiers and their position growing more precarious with each passing day. In time, the path led him onward to a daring rescue mission that would demonstrate his tactical brilliance while also revealing the profound loyalty his leadership had inspired among men who would follow him anywhere. The Siege of Alesia. A defining moment. The arduous march to relieve Cicero's beleaguered garrison swiftly became one of the most celebrated episodes in Caesar's illustrious military career, a perfect exemplar of how superior leadership and tactical flexibility could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Caesar's relief force was comparatively small, comprising only 2 legions and some auxiliary troops. Yet it moved with the astonishing speed and precision that had become the distinctive hallmark of his operations. The enemy forces relentlessly besieging Cicero numbered in the tens of thousands, drawn from multiple tribes that had coordinated their efforts with impressive, unprecedented efficiency. They had meticulously constructed elaborate siege works around the Roman camp, including extensive trenches, sturdy palisades, and formidable artillery positions that vividly demonstrated their rapidly growing sophistication in siege warfare. More ominously, they had learned to maintain unwavering discipline under pressure, actively avoiding the impulsive charges that had characterized earlier Gallic tactics. Caesar's approach to the rescue mission brilliantly showcased his mastery of psychological warfare as much as conventional military strategy, rather than attempting a direct, suicidal assault on the formidable siege lines given the overwhelming odds. He ingeniously employed a cunning combination of deception and mobility to confuse his enemies and create opportune moments for decisive action. His initial step was to meticulously establish communications with the besieged garrison through a series of intricate coded messages that revealed the comprehensive scope of his relief efforts while providing precise instructions for coordinated action. These vital messages were carried by loyal Gallic allies who could move freely and discreetly through enemy territory, and they served both to sustain morale among Cicero's desperate troops and to gather crucial intelligence about enemy dispositions and intentions. When Caesar finally struck, his attack materialized from an unexpected direction and at a moment when the enemy was fortuitously distracted by what appeared to be a feigned Roman retreat. The assault was meticulously coordinated with a sortie from the besieged camp, creating widespread confusion in the enemy ranks that Caesar's seasoned veterans ruthlessly exploited with devastating effectiveness. The siege was decisively broken within mere hours, and the rebel forces scattered in utter defeat, leaving behind vast quantities of equipment and supplies that would sustain Caesar's forces through the remainder of the harsh winter. The relief of Cicero's camp marked the pivotal turning point in the Great Gallic Rebellion. But it also starkly revealed the extent to which Caesar's position in Gaul depended intrinsically on his personal presence and unparalleled leadership. His enemies had learned a critical lesson. Roman forces could be defeated when they were not directly commanded by Caesar himself, a lesson that would profoundly influence their strategy in the ultimate phase of the conflict. The following spring brought new and formidable challenges as the rebellion broadened its scope, spreading to regions that had previously been considered entirely pacified. The movement was no longer simply a matter of traditional tribal resistance to foreign rule. It had powerfully evolved into something akin to a national liberation struggle, drawing fervent support from all strata of Gallic society. Druids who had previously maintained strict neutrality now began to preach that the gods themselves demanded the immediate expulsion of Roman influence. While merchants and craftsmen who had previously prospered from Roman trade now enthusiastically contributed to the war effort. And so, the story flows onward. As Caesar faced the gravest test of his career, a conflict that would determine not only his own fate, but the very future of Gaul and the delicate balance of power in the wider Roman world. The final, defining phase of the Gallic Wars was dominated by the emergence of a leader who would prove to be Caesar's most formidable opponent, a young Arvernian chieftain named Vercingetorix, whose name would become eternally synonymous with Celtic resistance to Roman rule. Unlike previous Gallic leaders who had relied primarily on traditional warfare and localized loyalties, Vercingetorix profoundly understood that defeating Caesar would demand entirely new strategies and an unprecedented level of unity among the traditionally fractious Celtic tribes. Vercingetorix was, in many fundamental ways, Caesar's polar opposite, a true product of traditional Celtic society who embodied the fierce warrior values that had shaped his people for centuries. He was young, likely in his early 30s, and hailed from a family that had long held prominence among the Arverni. His father had been tragically executed for attempting to restore the monarchy among his people, a background that imbued Vercingetorix with both a powerful personal motivation for opposing Roman rule and invaluable experience in the intricate complexities of tribal politics. But Vercingetorix was more than simply a traditional Celtic warrior. He had observed Roman methods with keen analytical precision, meticulously studying their strengths and weaknesses with the discerning attention of a natural strategist. He understood that previous Gallic rebellions had failed because they had attempted to confront Caesar on his own terms, engaging disciplined legions in pitched battles where Roman training and superior equipment provided decisive advantages. His strategy for the new rebellion was radically different from anything Caesar had encountered before. Instead of seeking quick victory through dramatic battles, Vercingetorix adopted a brutal scorched earth policy, meticulously designed to deny Caesar's forces the vital supplies they needed to maintain their positions. Gallic villages were systematically evacuated, their precious food stores destroyed. Cattle were driven into hiding, and crops were mercilessly burned in the fields to prevent Roman foraging. The psychological impact of this strategy was as critical as its practical effects. For the first time in the Gallic Wars, Caesar found himself consistently frustrated by an enemy who resolutely refused to offer battle on Roman terms. His legions, accustomed to swift, decisive victories that brought campaigns to a rapid conclusion, instead found themselves embroiled in a grinding war of attrition, where progress was measured in hard-won miles rather than dramatic battlefield triumphs. Vercingetorix also demonstrated unprecedented skill in uniting the notoriously fractious Celtic tribes under a single, unified command. This was perhaps his greatest achievement, for Celtic society had traditionally been characterized by relentless warfare between competing groups. The chieftain's remarkable ability to forge a genuine coalition from these disparate elements vividly revealed political talents that matched his formidable military abilities. The rebellion reached its dramatic climax with the siege of Alesia, a formidable hilltop fortress that Vercingetorix chose as his final, unyielding stronghold after a series of strategic retreats had drawn Caesar's forces deep into hostile territory. The position appeared utterly impregnable, protected by steep, unscalable cliffs and commanding panoramic views that would render any direct assault suicidal. More crucially, Vercingetorix had amassed a massive relief army that was rapidly marching to break any siege Caesar might attempt. In time, the path led him onward to the ultimate confrontation that would determine the very fate of Gaul and forever establish his reputation as one of history's greatest military commanders. Alesia, the apex of military genius. The siege of Alesia became the definitive, monumental moment of Caesar's illustrious career, a military operation so astonishingly complex and audacious that it seemed utterly impossible even to many of his own experienced officers. Faced with an enemy force that outnumbered his own troops by a staggering ratio of perhaps 10 to 1, Caesar devised a strategy that would have been summarily rejected as pure fantasy by any rational commander. He would simultaneously besiege Vercingetorix's forces entrenched within Alesia, while also meticulously defending against the colossal relief army that was inexorably approaching from the outside. The engineering project that Caesar's legions undertook was staggering in both its sheer scope and its audacious ambition. Working with the methodical efficiency that characterized all Roman military operations, they constructed 2 complete lines of fortifications around Alesia. One facing inward to contain the defenders, and another facing outward to provide resolute protection against the approaching relief force. The inner line, famously known as the circumvallation, stretched for 10 miles around the hilltop fortress, while the outer line, termed the contravallation, extended for 13 miles and incorporated elaborate obstacles meticulously designed to break up and channel enemy attacks. The monumental construction work proceeded under constant, harassing attacks from Vercingetorix's forces, who made repeated sorties to disrupt Roman activities. Caesar's soldiers worked with their weapons perpetually close at hand, ready to instantly drop their tools and engage in combat at a moment's notice. The arduous combination of backbreaking labor and constant vigilance tested the legion's endurance to its absolute limits. Yet, Caesar's personal example of unwavering fortitude kept morale remarkably high, even as the situation became increasingly desperate. The sheer complexity of the Roman siege works at Alesia vividly demonstrated the unparalleled engineering capabilities that had rendered Roman armies so formidable throughout the Mediterranean world. The fortifications included not only formidable walls and intricate trenches, but also sophisticated defensive obstacles, sharpened stakes cleverly concealed in pits, formidable iron spikes embedded in sturdy wooden blocks, and chevaux de frise meticulously designed to funnel enemy attacks into designated killing zones where Roman artillery could be most devastatingly effective. When the Gallic relief army finally arrived, Caesar found himself in the unique and precarious position of being simultaneously the besieger and the besieged. His forces, numbering perhaps 60,000 men, were perilously trapped between Vercingetorix's garrison and a massive relief force that contemporary sources estimated at over 200,000 warriors. The odds were so overwhelmingly unfavorable that some of Caesar's officers suggested attempting a desperate breakout before the tactical situation became utterly hopeless. Caesar's response was utterly characteristic of his unwavering leadership style throughout the Gallic Wars. Instead of passively accepting the defensive posture that circumstances seemed to dictate, he boldly chose to seize the initiative through aggressive, decisive action that would compel his enemies to react to his moves rather than follow their own predetermined plans. The battle that ensued was fiercely fought on multiple fronts simultaneously, with Caesar personally leading daring cavalry charges while his infantry valiantly held their positions against relentless attacks from both directions. The dramatic climax arrived when Caesar, keenly recognizing that conventional tactics were insufficient to break the desperate deadlock, mounted his horse and personally led a sweeping cavalry charge that struck the relief army at the precise moment when victory seemed tantalizingly within their grasp. His distinctive scarlet cloak made him instantly recognizable to both sides, and his electrifying appearance on the battlefield at the critical moment profoundly inspired his own troops while utterly demoralizing the enemy. The Gallic forces, caught between a relentless hammer and an unyielding anvil, broke and fled in utter disarray in all directions. And so, the story flows onward, as Caesar achieved what many considered the greatest military victory in Roman history, firmly establishing his reputation as a commander who could overcome any odds through a brilliant combination of tactical genius and unyielding personal courage. Aftermath in Gaul and the triumvirate's fracture. The surrender of Vercingetorix effectively marked the end of organized resistance to Roman rule in Gaul. Although scattered fighting would persist for several more years, the defeated chieftain's decision to surrender himself, thus sparing his followers from further suffering, powerfully revealed the same nobility of character that had rendered him such a formidable opponent. Caesar, in a display of magnanimity, treated his captured enemy with profound respect. Understanding that Vercingetorix had fought with immense courage for his people's independence, adhering to his own unwavering code of honor. The immediate aftermath of Alesia saw Caesar's forces systematically spreading throughout Gaul to suppress the remaining pockets of resistance, and to meticulously establish the administrative structures that would transform the conquered territories into a Roman province. The work was methodical and exceptionally thorough, encompassing not only military occupation but also the complex task of integrating Celtic society into the Roman system without irrevocably destroying the local institutions that made effective governance possible. Caesar's approach to pacification once again revealed the same political sophistication that had characterized his earlier dealings with Gallic tribes. He understood profoundly that lasting peace required more than mere military dominance. It demanded the astute creation of new social structures that would give conquered peoples a vested stake in Roman success. His comprehensive settlement included provisions for veteran colonies that would provide security while simultaneously demonstrating the tangible benefits of Roman citizenship. Road construction projects were initiated to improve vital communications and foster commerce. And legal reforms were enacted that preserved valuable Celtic customs within an overarching Roman framework. The immense wealth that flowed from the Gallic conquests was unprecedented in Roman history, irrevocably transforming Caesar from a debt-ridden politician into one of the wealthiest men in the ancient world. The vast quantities of gold and silver that filled his military treasury provided ample funds for generous bonuses to his loyal veterans, magnificent public works in Rome, and the essential political activities that would be necessary for his eventual return to civilian life. More critically, the conquest had bestowed upon him a devoted army that had shared in his numerous victories, and would follow him anywhere he chose to lead. But even as Caesar was achieving unparalleled success in Gaul, the political situation in Rome was dangerously deteriorating in ways that would ultimately compel him to choose between his personal safety and the hallowed constitutional traditions he had sworn to uphold. The first triumvirate, the very alliance that had made his Gallic command possible, was beginning to fracture under the relentless pressure of competing ambitions and the cruel hand of personal tragedies that no political alliance, however strong, could ultimately overcome. The first devastating crack in the triumvirate appeared with the untimely death of Julia, Caesar's beloved daughter and Pompey's wife, who tragically died in childbirth in 54 BC. The marriage had provided a crucial personal bond that had helped to mitigate the natural rivalry between two supremely ambitious men. And Julia's death removed a vital stabilizing influence on their complex relationship. Pompey was genuinely grief-stricken by the loss of his young wife, while Caesar mourned both his daughter and the far-reaching political implications of her passing. The second devastating blow arrived the following year with the death of Crassus, killed along with the majority of his army at the disastrous Battle of Carrhae while attempting to win military glory in a campaign against the formidable Parthian Empire. Crassus's death eliminated the third member of the triumvirate and left Caesar and Pompey as the two undisputed dominant figures in Roman politics, a situation that rendered conflict almost inevitable, given the inherently competitive nature of Roman culture. As news of these ominous developments reached Caesar in Gaul, he began to profoundly understand that his greatest challenges lay not in conquering barbarian tribes, but in navigating the treacherous, shark-infested waters of Roman politics upon his inevitable return. His enemies in the Senate, spearheaded by formidable figures like Cato the Younger and Marcus Bibulus, had been tirelessly working to construct an irrefutable case for his prosecution once his proconsular immunity expired. They accused him of exceeding his authority, conducting unauthorized wars, and violating various constitutional provisions during both his consulship and his sprawling Gallic campaigns. The charges were not entirely without merit, for Caesar had indeed pushed the boundaries of traditional Roman law in pursuit of his overarching strategic objectives. But the true issue was not legal, but fundamentally political. His unparalleled success in Gaul had rendered him too powerful to be safely accommodated within the existing system, and his enemies preferred to utterly destroy him rather than risk being perpetually overshadowed by his monumental achievements. Caesar's response to this mounting pressure vividly revealed the same strategic thinking that had served him so exceptionally well in his military campaigns. He began meticulously laying the groundwork for his return to Rome with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized his conquest of Gaul. His foremost priority was to secure election to a second consulship, which would provide him with crucial legal immunity and the necessary authority to implement the far-reaching reforms that Roman society desperately needed. In time, the path led him onward to the most momentous decision of his life, a choice that would determine not only his own destiny, but the very future of the Roman Republic itself. The Rubicon. A point of no return. The profound crisis that would ultimately unravel and destroy the Roman Republic began to escalate as Caesar's Gallic command neared its end, and the urgent question of his return to civilian life became paramount. Traditional constitutional practice unequivocally demanded that he relinquish his military authority and present himself in Rome as a private citizen before standing for election to any new office. This would leave him dangerously vulnerable to prosecution by his political enemies, who had made it abundantly clear that they intended to utilize the courts to politically and perhaps even physically annihilate him. Caesar's fervent supporters in Rome, led by influential tribunes like Mark Antony, attempted to devise a constitutional solution that would permit him to stand for the consulship in absentia, allowing him to remain with his armies until he could assume his new office with its attendant legal protections. This proposal was not entirely unprecedented, as other successful generals had been granted similar accommodations in the past. However, Caesar's opponents acutely recognized that approving such an arrangement would effectively acknowledge his undeniable superiority over traditional senatorial authority. The heated debate over Caesar's future swiftly transformed into a proxy war, encompassing larger, fundamental questions about the very nature of Roman government and the proper relationship between military commanders and civilian authority. Conservative senators vehemently argued that allowing Caesar to bypass normal procedures would establish a perilous precedent that could embolden future generals to hold the state hostage to their personal ambitions. Caesar's supporters countered that the extraordinary services he had rendered to Rome justly entitled him to exceptional consideration, and that his enemies' overt bias rendered normal legal procedures unreliable and unjust. As the political temperature continued to rise, both sides began to rigidly harden their positions in ways that rendered compromise increasingly difficult, if not impossible. Caesar's opponents, firmly convinced that his return would herald the demise of traditional republican government, became willing to risk civil war rather than concede to his demands. Caesar himself, keenly recognizing that submission would spell political death and potential physical destruction, began to meticulously prepare for military action against his own government. The point of no return arrived when the Senate passed its ultimate decree, the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, declaring a state of emergency and explicitly authorizing the consuls to take whatever measures were deemed necessary to preserve the state. This ancient formula had been invoked sparingly in Roman history, typically during foreign invasions or widespread slave rebellions, and its application to Caesar's situation represented an unprecedented and alarming escalation of the conflict. Caesar received word of the Senate's drastic action while he was still in Gaul, completing the final administrative details of his conquest and preparing his legions for the march to winter quarters. The news forced him to confront the stark reality that his political enemies had irrevocably chosen confrontation over compromise, leaving him with exceedingly limited options for a peaceful resolution of the escalating crisis. The decision that followed would be remembered as one of the most profoundly significant moments in human history, the precise juncture at which the Roman Republic began its inexorable transformation into the mighty empire that would dominate the ancient world for centuries to come. standing by the banks of the Rubicon, the small, unassuming river that marked the sacred boundary between his Gallic province and Italy proper, Caesar faced a choice that would determine not only his own destiny, but the very fate of civilization itself. And so, the story flows onward, as the greatest Roman of his age prepared to cross a monumental threshold from which there could be no return. Guided equally by unyielding ambition and dire necessity, the crossing of the Rubicon transpired on a cold January night in 49 BC. When Caesar led a single legion across the shallow waters that physically separated Gaul from Italy proper. The river itself was insignificant, barely 20 feet wide at its narrowest point. Yet its symbolic importance was immeasurable. Roman law strictly forbade any general from bringing armed forces into Italy without explicit senatorial authorization. And Caesar's act of crossing constituted an undeniable act of rebellion that rendered civil war inevitable. Caesar's famously uttered words, "Alia acta est, the die is cast," were reportedly spoken as he stepped into the frigid waters, although some sources suggest he quoted a line from the Greek playwright Menander. "Let the die be thrown." Whatever his precise words, their profound meaning was crystal clear. He had committed himself to a perilous course of action from which retreat was impossible. Willingly embracing the enormous risks that accompanied challenging the established order of the Roman world. The legion that accompanied Caesar across the Rubicon was the formidable 13th, a unit that had served with him throughout the arduous Gallic wars and whose loyalty to their revered commander was absolute and unwavering. These were hardened veterans who had shared in the triumphs at Alesia and countless smaller engagements, men who had grown wealthy from Caesar's generosity, and remained utterly confident in his unparalleled ability to lead them to victory against any opponent. Their unwavering willingness to follow him into civil war vividly demonstrated the profound personal bonds that Caesar had meticulously forged with his troops over years of shared hardship and resounding success. Civil war and the triumph in Greece. The march through Italy that swiftly followed the river crossing was unlike any military campaign in the annals of Roman history. Instead of encountering organized resistance, Caesar's relatively small army found itself enthusiastically welcomed as liberators by communities that had grown weary of corrupt governors and oppressive taxation. Town after town opened its gates without resistance, while local militias that had been ostensibly raised to oppose him often defected to his cause as soon as they encountered his advance guard. The sheer speed of Caesar's advance caught his enemies completely off guard. They had anticipated that he would spend months meticulously gathering his scattered legions from winter quarters throughout Gaul, affording them ample time to organize their defenses and rally support across Italy. Instead, he struck with lightning speed, leveraging the tactical mobility that had served him so exceptionally well against Gallic opponents to seize strategic positions before his enemies could even react. Pompey, who had been chosen by the Senate to spearhead the resistance against Caesar, found himself compelled to abandon Rome after less than 3 months of Caesar's relentless campaign. The great general who had conquered the East and earned the venerable title, Magnus, discovered that his opponent's formidable reputation for invincibility had preceded him, rendering it impossible to find reliable troops willing to stand against the conqueror of Gaul. The evacuation of Rome was a devastating psychological blow to Caesar's opponents, who had confidently predicted that Italian municipalities would rally to defend traditional authority against a rebellious proconsul. Instead, they found themselves in a frantic retreat towards southern ports while Caesar's forces occupied the capital almost without a single act of resistance. Caesar's entry into Rome was deliberately restrained, meticulously designed to demonstrate his unwavering respect for republican institutions, even as he wielded unprecedented personal power. He made no attempt to establish a royal court, or adopt the ostentatious trappings of monarchy. Instead, he presented himself as a loyal Roman who had been tragically compelled to take extreme measures to defend himself against factional enemies who had irrevocably corrupted the normal processes of government. In time, the path led him onward to new challenges that would test his political skills as severely as his military talents. as he now embarked upon the monumental task of governing a state that had been irrevocably torn apart by civil war. The civil war that erupted following Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon was fought on a scale that dwarfed the tribal conflicts of Gaul, encompassing not just Italy, but the entirety of the Mediterranean world, as both sides desperately sought allies and resources to bolster their cause. Pompey's strategic approach was to temporarily abandon the Italian peninsula while meticulously building up overwhelming forces in the eastern provinces, where his previous conquests had cultivated extensive networks of loyal clients who could provide both troops and crucial financial support. Caesar's response revealed the same profound strategic insight that had consistently guided his Gallic campaigns. Rather than immediately pursuing Pompey into regions where his enemy held significant advantages, Caesar chose to first consolidate his control over the western territories, meticulously ensuring that his base of operations was secure before launching campaigns in more distant theaters. The Spanish campaign that ensued vividly demonstrated Caesar's continued mastery of rapid warfare and innovative tactical approaches. Pompey's lieutenants in Spain commanded experienced legions and held strong defensive positions. Yet they found themselves outmaneuvered by an opponent who skillfully combined superior mobility with an intimate knowledge of the terrain acquired from his earlier service in the province. The decisive engagement at Ilerda became a masterpiece of tactical planning that achieved complete victory without a major pitched battle. Caesar's forces expertly surrounded the enemy armies and severed their vital supply lines, compelling them to surrender when continued resistance became utterly impossible. The captured legions were treated with characteristic generosity. Common soldiers were permitted to return home, while officers were offered opportunities to join Caesar's cause or retire from active service. However, it was the subsequent campaign in Greece that would ultimately determine the final outcome of the civil war and firmly establish Caesar's position as the dominant figure in Roman politics. Pompey had effectively utilized his time in the east, assembling an army that significantly outnumbered Caesar's forces while simultaneously constructing a formidable naval force that controlled most of the Mediterranean shipping lanes. The campaign initially unfolded badly for Caesar, whose early attempts to transport his armies across the Adriatic were frustrated by Pompey's overwhelming naval superiority. Several transport fleets were intercepted and destroyed, forcing Caesar to operate with reduced forces while his enemies steadily grew stronger with each passing month. The situation grew so desperate that Caesar personally attempted to cross the storm-tossed waters in a small boat, vividly demonstrating the same personal courage that had inspired his troops throughout his illustrious career. The turning point arrived at the Battle of Dyrrhachium, where Pompey achieved a tactical victory that, in all conventional wisdom, should have definitively ended the war in his favor. Caesar's forces were defeated and compelled to retreat, leaving behind significant quantities of equipment and supplies. For the first time in his remarkable military career, Caesar had been outmaneuvered by an opponent, and his enemies began to believe that his legendary invincibility was finally broken. But Caesar's response to defeat revealed the profound resilience that had carried him through the darkest moments of the Gallic rebellion. Instead of accepting the strategic implications of his loss, he regrouped his scattered forces and immediately began meticulously planning a new campaign that would draw Pompey away from his secure coastal strongholds into the interior of Greece, where Roman tactical superiority could be more effectively employed. And so, the story flows onward. As Caesar learned that even the greatest commanders must sometimes accept temporary defeat in order to achieve ultimate victory. Pharsalus. The decisive victory in clemency. The ultimate confrontation between Caesar and Pompey unfolded on the plains of Pharsalus in central Greece, where both commanders had meticulously assembled their finest troops for a battle that would irrevocably determine the fate of the Roman world. The armies arrayed against each other represented the culmination of Roman military development, boasting veteran legions that had conquered vast territories and earned formidable reputations for invincibility in their respective theaters of operation. Pompey's forces significantly outnumbered Caesar's, with perhaps 45,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry facing Caesar's 22,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. More crucially, Pompey's army included many of the finest units in Roman service, legions that had served him faithfully during his eastern conquests and retained complete, unwavering confidence in their commander's ability to achieve victory. Caesar's army, though smaller, possessed inherent advantages that would prove decisive in the impending battle. His soldiers were seasoned veterans of the Gallic Wars who held absolute faith in their commander's tactical abilities, while his officers had learned to function as a seamlessly integrated team during years of challenging campaigns. Perhaps most importantly, Caesar himself had cultivated the extraordinary ability to inspire his troops to unprecedented efforts through his personal example and genuine concern for their welfare. The battle itself was definitively decided by Caesar's brilliant tactical innovation in response to Pompey's overwhelming cavalry superiority. Instead of adhering to the traditional deployment that would have left his right flank perilously vulnerable to a cavalry attack, Caesar ingeniously concealed a fourth line of troops behind his main battle formation, strategically positioning them to counter the anticipated cavalry charge at the critical moment. When Pompey's cavalry finally launched their attack, confident that they could effortlessly roll up Caesar's line and achieve a decisive breakthrough, they suddenly found themselves confronted by fresh troops who had been specifically trained to counter mounted assaults. The surprise was absolute, and the ensuing cavalry retreat exposed Pompey's left flank to a coordinated infantry assault that swiftly spread panic throughout his entire army. The defeat at Pharsalus was so utterly complete that it effectively ended Pompey's ability to continue organized resistance. His forces scattered in all directions, with many units immediately surrendering, while others desperately attempted to reach friendly territories where they might regroup for future campaigns. Pompey himself escaped with a small group of loyal supporters, embarking on a desperate flight that would eventually lead to his tragic death on the shores of Egypt. Caesar's treatment of his defeated enemies at Pharsalus powerfully demonstrated the clemency that would become one of his most celebrated qualities as a ruler. Unlike previous civil wars, which had typically been followed by massive proscription lists and the systematic elimination of political opponents, Caesar chose to forgive the majority of those who had fought against him, magnanimously offering them opportunities to participate in the new order he was diligently creating. This policy of clemency was not merely humanitarian but also supremely practical, reflecting Caesar's profound understanding that lasting peace necessitated the integration of former enemies into new governmental structures. The Roman elite was too small and too talented to be wasted on vengeful purges, and Caesar keenly recognized his need for their skills and connections to effectively administer the vast territories that had come under his control. The relentless pursuit of Pompey led Caesar to Egypt, where he became inextricably embroiled in the complex dynastic struggles that had torn the ancient kingdom apart for decades. The famous romance with Cleopatra that blossomed during his Egyptian sojourn was far more than mere personal indulgence. It was a shrewd strategic alliance that secured Roman access to Egypt's immense agricultural wealth while also powerfully demonstrating Caesar's remarkable ability to effectively collaborate with non-Roman partners when circumstances imperatively required it. In time, the path led him onward to the final, most challenging phase of his career, when military victory would give way to the even more demanding task of governing an immense empire and comprehensively reforming institutions that had been stretched far beyond their original capabilities. Dictatorship and reforms, the dawn of a new era. Caesar's triumphant return to Rome following his victories in the Civil War heralded the dawn of a new epoch, in which traditional republican institutions would undergo a gradual, yet profound, transformation into the imperial system destined to govern the Roman world for centuries to come. The sweeping changes he meticulously implemented were presented as temporary expediencies, necessitated by the dire crisis of civil war, but they established enduring precedents that would prove utterly impossible to reverse once the immediate emergency had subsided. His foremost priority was the meticulous restoration of order and confidence throughout the vast territories that had been grievously disrupted by years of relentless warfare. Veterans urgently needed to be settled on lands that would provide them with security while simultaneously contributing to the vital agricultural production that nourished Rome's burgeoning population. Provincial governors needed to be judiciously chosen for their unwavering competence and unimpeachable integrity, rather than merely for their political connections, thereby ensuring that distant territories would be administered fairly and efficiently. The crippling debt crisis that had significantly contributed to the Civil War demanded immediate and decisive attention. As thousands of Roman citizens faced ruin from insurmountable obligations they could not possibly meet, Caesar's brilliant solution combined practical relief measures with longer-term structural reforms meticulously designed to prevent similar crises from arising in the future. He provided for partial debt forgiveness while simultaneously establishing new, stringent regulations for lending practices that would robustly protect borrowers from exploitation by unscrupulous creditors. Perhaps most significantly, Caesar initiated the groundbreaking process of expanding Roman citizenship to deserving individuals and communities throughout the vast empire. He keenly recognized that the antiquated distinction between Romans and foreigners was becoming increasingly meaningless in a world where non-Italians frequently served with distinction in Roman army and administration. His generous grants of citizenship to Gallic chieftains and Spanish municipalities represented the nascent beginnings of a profound transformation that would eventually forge Rome into a truly cosmopolitan empire. The calendar reform that Caesar implemented during this period vividly demonstrated his meticulous attention to seemingly mundane details that could, in fact, have far-reaching practical consequences. The traditional Roman calendar had become so profoundly misaligned with the actual solar year that religious festivals were occurring in the incorrect seasons, severely disrupting agricultural schedules and creating widespread confusion throughout the empire. Caesar's new calendar, meticulously based on advanced Egyptian astronomical knowledge, corrected these fundamental problems and established a precise system that would remain in continuous use for over 15 centuries. His ambitious building projects in Rome itself were conceived not only to provide much-needed employment for the urban masses but also to create magnificent monuments that would powerfully demonstrate the inherent power and permanence of his new order. The Forum Julium, with its majestic temple to Venus Genetrix, honoring the goddess from whom the Julian family proudly claimed descent, served as both a religious center and a profound political statement about the divine favor that seemingly supported Caesar's rule. The public games and spectacles that Caesar sponsored reached unprecedented levels of magnificence, featuring gladiatorial contests of unparalleled scale, exhilarating wild beast hunts, and elaborate theatrical performances that entertained hundreds of thousands of spectators while simultaneously demonstrating the colossal resources at his disposal. These events were more than mere entertainment. They were meticulously orchestrated displays of power that effectively communicated political messages to audiences who might never participate directly in governmental processes. However, even as Caesar achieved remarkable success in addressing the pressing practical problems that confronted Roman society, he inadvertently created new tensions that would ultimately threaten everything he had so painstakingly accomplished. His relentless accumulation of honors and titles, though consistently presented as reluctant acceptance of necessary burdens, began to deeply alarm traditionalists who perceived in them the unmistakable trappings of monarchy, a form of rule that Romans had vehemently rejected centuries earlier. And so, the story flows onward. As Caesar discovered that unparalleled success in governing an empire could, ironically, create enemies as dangerous as any he had faced on the bloody battlefields of Gaul or Greece. The conspiracy, betrayal, and assassination. The insidious conspiracy that would ultimately cost Caesar his very life began to quietly coalesce among men who had benefited immensely from his clemency but could not reconcile themselves to the profound reality of his supreme, unchallenged power. Many of the conspirators were former enemies who had been magnanimously pardoned after Pharsalus while others were longtime supporters who had become deeply convinced that Caesar's continued rule posed an existential threat to the republican institutions they had sworn to fiercely defend. Marcus Junius Brutus, arguably the most renowned of the conspirators, perfectly embodied the complex and often conflicting motivations that drove the plot against Caesar. He was a direct descendant of the legendary founder of the Roman Republic, who had famously expelled the last king and established the very constitutional system that the conspirators passionately claimed to be defending. More personally, Brutus had been treated by Caesar almost as a beloved son, receiving honors and responsibilities that unmistakably reflected genuine affection and profound trust. The psychological burden of contemplating action against Caesar was enormous for men like Brutus, who deeply understood that they were planning not only a political assassination but also an intimate, personal betrayal of someone who had shown them nothing but kindness and unwavering favor. The conspirators found themselves compelled to rationalize that their sacred duty to the state transcended personal loyalty, that Caesar's death was an absolute necessity to preserve the freedoms that his continued life would inevitably, irrevocably destroy. The plot developed slowly and meticulously over many months, as the conspirators carefully recruited new members while assiduously avoiding detection by Caesar's extensive intelligence network. They keenly understood that their success would hinge not merely on the act of killing Caesar, but also on having a concrete, viable plan for what would follow his death, a clear pathway to restoring republican government that would convincingly justify their extreme, desperate actions. Caesar himself appears to have been aware that plots were steadily developing against him, yet his response was characteristically bold rather than cautiously circumspect. He deliberately dismissed his bodyguard, asserting that a leader who required protection from his own citizens was inherently unworthy of rule. He continued to appear in public regularly, attending Senate meetings and social events where potential assassins could easily approach him. Some historians have speculated that Caesar was growing weary of the immense burdens of supreme power, and perhaps even welcomed the prospect of release from responsibilities that had consumed his entire adult life. Others argue that his apparent carelessness reflected an ultimate, supreme confidence in his ability to master any threat through his personal charisma and unparalleled political skill. The truth likely combined elements of both explanations. As Caesar grappled with the colossal challenge of governing an empire while meticulously maintaining the delicate illusion that he was simply first among equals in a meticulously restored republic, the final weeks before the assassination were ominously marked by an increasing number of unsettling omens and dire warnings that Caesar, despite the urgent pleas of his wife Calpurnia and other close associates, chose to disregard. Soothsayers grimly warned him to beware the Ides of March, while friends reported disturbing dreams and strange, unsettling occurrences that seemed to presage disaster. Caesar's dismissive attitude towards these warnings reflected both his rational skepticism about superstition and his fatalistic acceptance that great men must, at times, confront great risks. The morning of March 15, 44 BC, dawned clear and cold in Rome, with a crisp frost coating the city's rooftops and a gentle breeze stirring the banners that hung from public buildings. Caesar awoke early in his house on the Palatine Hill, enveloped by the familiar sounds of a great city stirring to life, the distant murmur of conversation drifting up from the streets below, the rhythmic creaking of cartwheels on ancient stone pavements, and the insistent calls of vendors setting up their stalls in the nearby forum. In time, the path led him onward to his final, fateful appointment with destiny, walking through the very streets he had known since childhood, towards a confrontation that would reverberate through the centuries. The Senate meeting, convened for the Ides of March, was scheduled to take place in Pompey's Theater, as the regular Senate House was undergoing repairs. The profound irony of the location, Caesar's enemies gathering in a building dedicated to his greatest rival, was not lost on those who understood the full, intricate story of recent events. As Caesar made his way through the bustling morning streets, accompanied by a small retinue of loyal friends and clients, he encountered several individuals who desperately attempted to warn him of the imminent danger that awaited. Artemidorus, a Greek teacher of rhetoric who had learned of the plot through his connections among the conspirators, urgently pressed a scroll into Caesar's hands that contained detailed, explicit information about the planned assassination. Caesar accepted the document but became distracted by other insistent petitioners and tragically never found an opportunity to read it. The unread scroll remained clutched in his hand as he entered the theater, a final, mischance for survival that circumstances cruelly prevented him from taking. The conspirators had strategically positioned themselves throughout the meeting hall, with some blocking potential escape routes while others stood ready to strike when the prearranged signal was given. Their meticulously planned attack called for Brutus to deliver the first blow, both due to his profound symbolic importance as a direct descendant of the Republic's founder, and because his action would irrevocably commit him to their cause. When Caesar took his seat in the curule chair that unmistakably marked his position as dictator, the conspirators approached under the pretense of presenting a petition for the recall of Publius Cimber, one of Brutus's brothers, who had been exiled for political activities. The request was reasonable enough to avert immediate suspicion, while also providing crucial cover for the assassins to gather closely around their unsuspecting target. Caesar's response to the petition was characteristically direct and unyielding. He flatly refused to consider the recall, stating that decisions made through proper legal procedures should not be reversed through private appeals. His refusal provided the precise signal the conspirators had been anxiously awaiting. And Casca struck the first blow with a dagger that wounded but did not seriously injure the dictator. What ensued was a frenzied, chaotic attack that bore little resemblance to the dignified political action the conspirators had envisioned. Caesar fought back vigorously, striking at his attackers with the stylus he had been using to take notes, and desperately attempting to break free from the tightening circle of assailants that surrounded him. The scene was utterly chaotic and bloody, more akin to a desperate street brawl than the solemn execution of justice the plotters had intended. The moment that ultimately shattered Caesar's resistance came when he caught sight of Brutus among his attackers, dagger in hand, seemingly determined to strike a blow for Republican freedom. The shocking sight of his protege among his enemies appears to have utterly destroyed Caesar's will to continue fighting, leading to his famous, heartbreaking last words. "Et tu, Brute? And you, Brutus?" With that profound recognition of ultimate betrayal, Caesar ceased his resistance and allowed the conspirators to complete their grim work. The great Julius Caesar died at the base of Pompey's statue, in a widening pool of blood that stained the marble floor of the very theater where his former rival had once received the thunderous applause of admiring crowds. His body bore 23 wounds, though the subsequent autopsy revealed that only one had been immediately fatal. The conspirators had succeeded in killing the most powerful man in the world. But they would soon discover that ending Caesar's life was far easier than ending his enduring influence. And so, the story flows onward, as the death of one man unleashed forces that would irrevocably transform the ancient world in ways the assassins had never intended or even imagined. The legacy of Caesar. From chaos to empire. The immediate aftermath of Caesar's assassination was pure chaos, vividly revealing how utterly the conspirators had failed to plan for what would inevitably follow their dramatic act. They had naively assumed that killing the dictator would automatically restore republican government. But they discovered instead that Roman society had been so profoundly transformed by decades of civil war and autocratic rule that a simple return to traditional practices was utterly impossible. The conspirators' first monumental mistake was their failure to secure the crucial support of Mark Antony, Caesar's most capable lieutenant, who had been deliberately detained outside the theater during the assassination by conspirators assigned to prevent his intervention. When Antony learned of Caesar's death, he immediately began organizing the Caesarian party for what would inevitably become a brutal struggle for control of the state. His possession of Caesar's private papers and treasury gave him enormous advantages in the relentless political maneuvering that ensued. The public reading of Caesar's will delivered another shock to the conspirators and a powerful propaganda victory for his ardent supporters. Caesar had bequeathed substantial sums to every Roman citizen, while also generously dedicating his private gardens to the people as a public park. These provisions eloquently demonstrated his continued concern for popular welfare even in death, while also subtly suggesting that he had been meticulously planning for the future rather than seeking to establish a permanent tyranny. Perhaps most importantly, the well-named Gaius Octavius, Caesar's 18-year-old grandnephew, as his adopted son and heir. The young man would eventually become the revered Emperor Augustus, but at the time of Caesar's death, he seemed an unlikely candidate to inherit the leadership of the Caesarian party. His youth, limited political experience, and distinct lack of military credentials made him appear to be little more than a placeholder who could be easily manipulated by more experienced politicians. The funeral that followed became a defining moment in Roman political theater, as Antony's impassioned eulogy dramatically transformed public opinion about the assassination and its perpetrators. Speaking from the rostra, where Caesar himself had delivered so many memorable speeches, Antony powerfully reminded the surging crowd of the dictator's monumental achievements: his conquest of Gaul, his decisive victories in the Civil War, his magnanimous treatment of enemies, and his tireless efforts to address the myriad problems that plagued Roman society. When Antony displayed Caesar's blood-stained toga and pointed to each rent made by the conspirators' daggers, the crowd's mood shifted violently from grief to unbridled rage. The senators who had claimed to be liberating Rome were now perceived as cold-blooded murderers who had wantonly destroyed a beloved benefactor of the people. Rioting erupted throughout the city, forcing the conspirators to flee for their lives while their houses were savagely attacked by angry mobs. The cremation of Caesar's body took place in the Forum, where the frenzied crowd hastily constructed an impromptu pyre from whatever materials they could scavenge. The flames that consumed the dictator's remains also marked the grim beginning of a new phase of civil war that would rage for over a decade before finally concluding with the establishment of the Principate under Augustus. The profound irony of the situation was not lost on thoughtful observers. The conspirators had killed Caesar to save the Republic, but their action had inadvertently made the restoration of republican government more difficult than ever before. The terrifying precedent of political assassination would inexorably encourage future violence, while the martyrdom of Caesar would provide a potent symbol for those who sought to continue his work of imperial expansion and far-reaching social reform. In time, the path led him onward to immortality, as Caesar's name became synonymous with imperial power, and his colossal legacy profoundly shaped the development of Western civilization for centuries to come. The transformation of Caesar from a mortal politician to a legendary figure began almost immediately after his death, as supporters and enemies alike recognized that his influence would undeniably persist long after his physical presence had ceased. The brilliant comet that appeared in the skies during the games held to honor his memory was interpreted by many Romans as irrefutable proof that Caesar had been received among the gods, a belief that his heir, Octavian, would later formalize through official deification. The Caesarian party that emerged from the chaos following the assassination proved remarkably durable, surviving the intense conflicts between Antony and Octavian that dominated the next phase of Roman civil war. Even when the two men became bitter enemies, both continued to claim Caesar's legacy and to present themselves as the true inheritors of his grand vision for Rome's future. Their eventual conflict at the Battle of Actium was fought not over whether Caesar's work should continue, but over who possessed the legitimate right to complete it: Augustus, as Octavian became known after his decisive victory over Antony, proved to be a worthy successor who skillfully combined Caesar's political acumen with a more cautious approach to constitutional innovation. The Principate that he meticulously established preserved the outward forms of republican government, while cunningly concentrating real power in the hands of a single ruler, a brilliant compromise. He provided the stability Rome desperately needed while assiduously avoiding the appearance of monarchy that had tragically cost Caesar his life. The military reforms that Caesar had initiated were comprehensively completed by Augustus and his successors. leading to the creation of professional legions that could effectively maintain order throughout the vast territories of the empire, while also providing unprecedented opportunities for ambitious men to advance through merit rather than merely through birth. The magnificent roads, intricate aqueducts, and grand public buildings that indelibly marked Roman civilization throughout Europe, Africa, and Asia reflected the sophisticated engineering principles and administrative practices that Caesar had boldly pioneered during his governorships and campaigns. Perhaps most importantly, the visionary concept of Roman citizenship that Caesar had begun to expand became the very foundation of a truly cosmopolitan empire, where talent and unwavering loyalty mattered more than ethnic origin or place of birth. The Spanish, Gallic, and African soldiers who rose to prominence in later Roman armies were following paths that Caesar had first opened during his provincial commands and civil war campaigns. The rich literary tradition that preserved Caesar's memory was equally crucial in establishing his lasting influence. His own commentaries on the Gallic and Civil Wars became enduring models of clear, direct prose that profoundly influenced historical writing for centuries. The speeches and letters that Cicero and other contemporaries diligently preserved provided intimate glimpses into Caesar's complex personality and incisive thinking, keeping his memory vibrantly alive long after the specific political issues of his time had faded into obscurity. Later historians, from Suetonius and Plutarch to modern scholars, have continued to find in Caesar's extraordinary career invaluable lessons about leadership, ambition, and the intricate relationship between individual genius and profound historical circumstances. His unparalleled ability to inspire fierce personal loyalty, to adapt seamlessly to changing situations, and to relentlessly pursue long-term goals despite immediate obstacles has rendered him an enduring subject of study for military officers, political leaders, and discerning students of human nature alike. The languages that developed from Latin carried Caesar's name into every corner of the known world, while the calendar he reformed continued to meticulously regulate daily life for over 15 centuries. The title, Caesar, itself became synonymous with imperial authority, adopted by rulers from the German Kaisers to the Russian Tsars, who all proudly claimed to inherit his mantle of universal dominion. And so, the story flows onward, as Caesar's influence spread far beyond the geographical boundaries of the Roman Empire, profoundly shaping the development of Western civilization and providing inspiration for countless individuals who faced their own moments of critical decision between safety and the pursuit of true greatness. Enduring lessons from a colossus of history. As we approach the gentle conclusion of our tranquil journey through Caesar's remarkable life, it is profoundly worthwhile to reflect upon the enduring lessons that his extraordinary story offers to those who seek to comprehend the complex, intricate relationship between individual ambition and monumental historical change. Caesar lived during a transformative era when ancient certainties were crumbling and new possibilities were vividly emerging, a perilous situation that unequivocally demanded extraordinary vision and unyielding courage to navigate successfully. His early life powerfully demonstrated the paramount importance of thorough preparation and continuous, relentless learning, as he masterfully honed the indispensable skills of oratory, law, and military command that would later serve him with unparalleled effectiveness in positions of supreme responsibility. His unwavering willingness to embrace calculated risks, from his defiant stance against Sulla to his momentous crossing of the Rubicon, vividly illustrated how truly great achievements frequently necessitate bold, decisive action in the face of inherently uncertain outcomes. The Gallic Wars unveiled his extraordinary ability to adapt his methods to rapidly changing circumstances, all while never losing sight of his ultimate, overarching objectives. His innovative treatment of conquered peoples, skillfully combining firm control with generous opportunities for advancement, established administrative patterns of imperial governance that would endure for many centuries. His deep, personal relationships with his soldiers eloquently demonstrated how truly effective leadership fundamentally requires genuine concern for the welfare of those who serve diligently under your command. The civil war that ensued magnificently showcased both the vast possibilities and the inherent dangers of challenging established authority. Caesar's ultimate victory proved conclusively that traditional institutions could indeed be overcome by superior organization and a more compelling, unifying vision. However, the cost in blood and treasure was undeniably enormous. His clemency towards defeated enemies powerfully illustrated that magnanimity in victory could be far more potent and impactful than vengeance. Though it also revealed the inherent risks that accompany trusting those who have legitimate reason to resent your overwhelming success. Caesar's brief, pivotal period as dictator starkly illuminated the profound challenges confronting anyone who endeavors to reform institutions that have outlived their usefulness, while simultaneously striving to maintain popular support and constitutional legitimacy. His tragic assassination vividly demonstrated the devastating consequences that can ensue when reformers move too rapidly for their societies to fully comprehend and accept. Yet, it also powerfully showed how transformative ideas can prove far more durable and enduring than the individuals who first conceived them. The subsequent history of the Roman Empire irrefutably proved that Caesar's grand vision of a cosmopolitan state, governed by merit rather than birth, was indeed achievable. However, this monumental achievement was only realized through the painstaking, patient work of multiple generations who diligently built upon the foundational structures he had laid. The slow, deliberate transformation of Rome from a mere city-state ruling an empire through sheer force into a genuine commonwealth, where diverse peoples could participate as equals, required centuries of gradual, organic development. In our own contemporary era, when established institutions face formidable challenges that demand bold leadership and innovative solutions, Caesar's unparalleled example offers both profound inspiration and a cautionary warning. His extraordinary achievements unequivocally demonstrate what determined individuals can accomplish when they brilliantly combine visionary insight with practical, tangible skills. But his ultimate fate serves as a poignant reminder that even the most successful reformers must meticulously navigate the delicate balance between the imperative need for change and the inherent humour and desire for continuity. The quiet, unyielding courage that Caesar consistently displayed throughout his illustrious career, from his early defiance of Sulla to his final deliberate dismissal of bodyguards, powerfully suggests that true greatness frequently necessitates embracing risks that more cautious individuals would instinctively avoid. His profound willingness to entrust his destiny to fortune, while simultaneously doing everything humanly possible to influence the outcome through meticulous preparation and unparalleled skill, provides an inspiring model for anyone who seeks to achieve something truly beyond the ordinary. As we gently conclude this serene exploration of Caesar's life and enduring legacy, let us recall his own profound words about the intricate relationship between creation and learning, wisdom that seems especially apt for those who seek solace, rest, and renewal through thoughtful contemplation of the past. For in diligently studying the lives of remarkable individuals such as Caesar, we actively participate in the ongoing, timeless conversation between past and present, a dialogue that immeasurably enriches our understanding of the boundless panorama of human possibility. In the timeless words of Caesar himself, words that seem to softly echo across the centuries with their perennial wisdom, "It is better to create than to learn. Creating is, indeed, the very essence of life." And with these gentle, profound words of wisdom from one of history's most extraordinary figures, our journey through the rise and fall of Julius Caesar comes to its peaceful, contemplative conclusion. May his story bring you profound rest, and may your dreams be filled with the quiet grandeur of ancient Rome, beneath the shimmering embrace of starlit skies. Sleep well, dear travelers. Sleep well.